I'd like to call to order the closed session, nope, wrong one. The Albany City Council meeting for November 20th, 2017. Please join Councilmember Barnes in the Pledge of Allegiance. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barnes,
Present.
Councilmember Moss,
Here.
Councilmember Nason. Here. Vice Mayor Pilch,
Here.
Mayor McQuaid.
Here. The Albany City Council was dismayed to learn that in a departure from historical practice, the cross on Albany Hill was lit by the Albany Lions Club on Friday, November 10th. I'm sure many Albany residents recognize Veterans Day in a manner which was appropriate and meaningful for them. I want to reiterate that neither the City Council nor the City of Albany endorses in any way the lighting of the cross for any occasion, religious or nationalistic, or supports its continued presence on public property. The Lions Club filed suit in federal court on September 11th against the City of Albany and several employees and council members individually. This civil action seeks damages and injunctive relief for deprivation of due process, equal protection, interference with the right of free speech, and interference with the free exercise of religion. The city is responding to the Lions Club's claims to the judicial process. We appreciate the input and support we've received to date from the public, and we encourage you to continue respectfully sharing your concerns with both the Lions Club and the City Council. And I understand we have some public comment on this evening.
Yes. Amy Neal and Reverend Kevin Omi.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Amy Neal, a 23-year resident of Albany and spokesperson for the local community group Albany Hill Park for All. First, we wish to thank the Council for your continued leadership in upholding the values of diversity and inclusiveness to which our community aspires. We appreciate the Council's position that the cross on Albany Hill, which is maintained by the Lions Club, is inappropriate on city property. Back in the beginning of July, our group began petitioning the Lions Club to work collaboratively with the city to relocate or remove the cross and avoid costly and divisive litigation. We were quite disappointed that the Albany Lions Club chose to file a lawsuit against the city and the very community which it purports to serve. 195 members of our community have signed our petition, either online or in person. On November 9th, members of our group delivered the petition to the Lions Club, and we'd like to share a copy with the City Council as well. The text of the petition reads, "To the Albany Lions Club. Since the Albany Lions Club began maintaining the Albany Hill Cross on public land in the early 1970s, Albany has grown more ethnically and culturally diverse. We are now home to residents of many religions and no religion. Maintaining a highly visible sectarian religious symbol on public land is inconsistent with the welcoming to all community that we and Lions Clubs around the world value. We respect and are grateful for the Albany Lions Club long history of community service. But in this new era, removing the cross will better serve us and the Albany Lions Club own mission. Together, we can create a more inclusive, culturally sensitive, and stronger community. Let us work together toward an Albany that is thoughtful of all our diverse residents. We call on the Albany Lions Club to work collaboratively with the Albany City's residents and the City Council to remove the cross and continue to realize the club's community building service-focused mission." That's the end of the petition. But many of the people who signed the petition also shared comments about why the removal of the cross is important to them. And I'll give you the petition, and I encourage the council to read through the comments. They're quite moving, and I'd like to just share a few here in the little remaining time. 1, as a Christian, I support separation of church and state. Please take down the cross. 2, I appreciate the many good things the Lions Club has done for the Albany community, but a highly visible electrified religious symbol on public land that implies governmental preference for one religion over others is not appropriate. 3, I pass through the shadow of the cross often, and its presence always generates great discomfort for me. It must come down from public land on which it stands. Please respect all your neighbors and members of the community, not just some. Finally, the cross makes me and my family feel like we don't belong, even though my kids have known no other home. Please take down the cross. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's that petition.
Are there other speakers specifically on this item?
Good evening. I'm Reverend Kevin Omi. I have been an Albany resident since 2012. I am senior pastor at Sycamore Congregational Church in El Cerrito. I'm also a member of the United Church of Christ Board of Directors, and our denomination believes that God is still speaking. I'm a multiracial person. I have both Japanese and Scottish ancestry, and my maternal grandparents were Salvation Army missionaries in Japan. The Japanese American community has always included Buddhists and Christians. Now, like many third-generation folks, we have a decreasing number of people for whom the cross carries the same import as it has in the past. Every Thursday night at our church, we have an interfaith meditation gathering. And in that context, we will share inspiring quotes from the Quran, as well as Christian and Buddhist scriptures. So it is truly an interfaith gathering. Every Sunday at Sycamore, we say, no matter who you are or where you are in life's journey, you are welcome here. And we mean that for people of all faiths. While we are a Christian church, our preschool serves families who may be of other faith traditions or none at all, which is perfectly fine with us. At our Thanksgiving Sunday service, just yesterday, we celebrated with gratitude for all the wonderful things that God has done for us. They are indescribable gifts, and for me, being a member of this city is an indescribable gift from God. As I began to wrap up my sermon on Sunday, I said these very carefully chosen words, for those of us that are Christians, because I knew that in our congregation that Sunday, we had a lot of people who weren't, and that was fine. So for those of us that are Christians, the most indescribable gift of all is Jesus. So that's my personal faith. And my role as a Christian pastor is to help people to look to Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. And while seeing the cross on Albany Hill can be a source of hope for me, I also can view it as a symbol of oppression, one that suggests that Christianity is or should be the dominant faith of our city. It isn't, and it shouldn't be, nor should any symbol of any other religious tradition. And that's why I encourage you to continue to resist efforts to light the cross on Albany Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I also represent Albany Hill for All. My family lives at the base of Albany Hill. I'm a 13-year resident with 2 kids in Albany schools. My youngest daughter was born in our kitchen, so lays at least some claim to the most authentically Albanian resident. I am atheist and have neighbors, friends, and family members of a variety of faiths and no faith. My own children's heritage is a 4th Arab, a 4th German Jew, and half Protestant Christian. Whenever the Albany Hill Cross is lit, it sends its message from our public park to young and old, far and wide, emphatically stating that we are a Christian town. If there is some other intended message being delivered by setting a cross ablaze atop a hill from a public park, that other message is surely lost on many people, since a lit cross is a blunt instrument of communication open to many interpretations, as we've heard. I'm confident my own children's great-grandmother did not come to the U.S. fleeing Nazi Germany so that her great-grandchildren could live in a town that proclaims itself Christian territory. Recently, the cross has been lit on September 11 and Veterans Day. That is misguided and offensive because it comes from our public park. It explicitly excludes countless atheists, Jews, Muslims, and others. We and the signers of the petition want Albany Hill for all, One step to having people of all religions, including Christianity, respected equally is to make sure government does not favor one religious group over others or over non-religion via its use of public spaces. When one group has had a privileged position and then becomes on equal footing with all their groups, it can feel to them like persecution. But I think we should ask the students at Albany High School, who were recently the targets of Nazi salutes and anti-Semitic graffiti, what religious persecution feels like, and ask ourselves where the students doing that kind of bullying might be getting the idea that some religious groups are superior to others. Ideas like that come from lots of sources. We are encouraged to see the city is working to remove one of those sources in our public park. But we wish the Lions would work with the city, like the Lions in Santa Clara recently did to relocate the cross to private land. We recognize that the existence of an easement complicates matters and often makes me wonder what kind of person would try to preserve their own newly erected personal religious symbol on land as they sell it off to become a public park. We encourage the city to continue to work for the removal of the cross from our public park and fight against selling off parkland atop the hill, as the Lions in their lawsuit have said needs to be done. We want Albany Hill Park for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers specifically on this item? You have any? Okay. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Do any council members wish to pull an item?
I do, but Mayor, did you skip over a report on action number 4?
Did.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor Pilch. During the consent calendar, or excuse me, during the closed session, the council unanimously agreed to appoint Ann Sue as the interim city clerk as per the city charter. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to focus. Okay, Vice Mayor Pilch, you wanted to pull,
5.3 and 5.4.
and I want to pull 5.5 and 5.6.
And I'd like to pull 5.9.
Michael, anybody? Rochelle?
No.
Okay. You want to start?
Yeah, so 5.3, just a very minor item. I noticed for the first time that some Albany Police Activity League items were in the disbursements, and I did not know that the city funded APAL, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think it's great, and I think it's a wonderful organization, and I just, it made me curious to make sure that we were documenting the organization well enough since it is funded by the city, and I just asked staff that we make a few additions to the website to publicize meeting dates and times. I think that meeting dates and times, and perhaps the charter or the bylaws, and perhaps I think there is already contact information. Perhaps contact information to the board members, things like that. But I'll leave it up to the staff to do that. That was it for 5.3. 5.4 was about updating the Community Media Access Committee purpose and responsibilities. Everything looks good to me, except there was a reference to the word adult in getting sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but allowing for adult volunteers to step up. And I spoke with staff about this, and staff agreed that the word adult in this context wasn't necessary. Specifically, I was thinking of high school students who are interested in media, wanting to step up and volunteer. So staff agreed that they thought that was an okay word to remove from the language, if I'm getting that right. Yeah. And that was item 5.4.
Thank you. I pulled 5.5, which were our letters that were sent to the Republican delegation of congressmen from the state of California regarding the tax measures. They were sent out last week prior to their vote, and we have letters to both Senator Feinstein and Senator Harris, which will be sent out tomorrow. 5.6, regarding these complete streets on page 2, where it says public art, directional signage, gateway improvements can be incorporated into the plan. I'd like to see that changed to shall be incorporated into the plan to ensure public art is part of the plan. Okay. You had a
5.9. 5.9 is the 3-year street sweeping contract. I just had some general questions. I don't know if somebody from staff can answer a few of them. I'm glad that we found somebody to do our street sweeping. I know that there was a period of time where we lost our street sweeper, and it was good that you were able to come up with somebody. But looking over the contract, I apologize if this sounds these are a little bit too much inside baseball, but I'm on the Waste Management Board, and we've had discussions about some of these items I'm bringing up. So one is, do we have an approximate idea how much is actually picked up off of Albany streets?
So as part of our reporting for the MPDS permit, we do trash capture calculations that take into account. It covers a couple things. I think it takes into account street sweeping, but then we also have inserts into catch basins that take out trash that we then clean. So I don't have those numbers.
So we don't have those two numbers separate?
I don't know the actual calculation or the breakout of that. I could probably pull that out and circulate it, but
Okay.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay. I think I have found out some of these things. One question was, it's a mix of stuff that comes off the streets, and this time of year, it's a lot of leaves and organic matter, but there's always that mix of whatever else is out there, cigarette butts, hopefully not too many of those, but cans and bottles and plastic and gum wrappers and plus a combination of oil and other auto fluids and stuff. So I take it from that we're unable to sort out the organic from the other stuff.
So again, I think it's the combination of the street sweeping, which picks up some of the, the trash piece of it, but then the catch basin inserts, which we're, I think, progressively every year adding more and more, have other filtering capabilities, and I think that might address some of the oils and stuff coming off.
Okay, so it isn't all considered in the category of household hazardous waste. We don't have to.
The stuff we pull up and
Yeah.
off the ground. So the disposal's included in the contract. I don't know exactly what that classification is, and I know the stuff we take out of the catch basins gets disposed of at, I think, a landfill. I don't know exactly what the classification is. But
Okay. Finally, the question is, where does it go? I think there's something in the contract that says it goes to a. I can't think of the word, but it doesn't say exactly where it's going, but it says it's a reputable or site. Do you know what site it actually goes to?
No, I know there's a couple of places that it goes to. I think Richmond. I think there's a transfer station that we take it to in Berkeley, and I think there was one other place that was tossed around. I don't know exactly where the contractor.
Okay, because to my mind, that's important, because when stuff goes out of county, it's supposedly, there's still a tipping fee that's due to Alameda County that should come back. And so I would like to know if you can, and let me know where this stuff goes.
I'll look into that. This firm we're using also does Emeryville, so I imagine the issues are very similar. So
Yeah, well, if it's being picked up in Alameda County and it's going to a out-of-county site, there's a question of whether the tipping fees are coming back to Alameda County. And our small amount of leaves and debris that we're picking up in Albany streets aren't much, but it turns out that there's millions of dollars a year in tipping fees that the county is losing out on, mostly from construction sites, but it is an issue. So I don't have a problem passing this tonight, but I would like to sort of know what the contractor who's taking this over is.
Okay, I'll follow up with the tipping fee issue as well as trying to get an assessment of quantity collected from both the sweeping as well as the catch basin inserts.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Are there members of the public that wish to pull an item? I'm sorry?
5-5.
Okay, 5-5. Do you have a question? Yes. Okay, do you want to come up here and ask your question?
I may have missed, Alan Maris, Albany resident, I may have missed this. Is that letter going to Republican members of Congress from California?
It went last week.
And did it?
Yes.
Go to them? Thank you.
Uh-huh. Any other items to be pulled by the public? Seeing none, could we get a motion to accept the consent calendar? Oops.
I'll move the consent calendar with the changes recommended by council members.
Second.
Poll the council, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuay?
Yes, and the motion carries. Good of the city is a time for persons desiring to address the city council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note, city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or future agenda. Hey, Jeremiah, you look like you're ready.
Hi, good evening. Yes, I'm ready. I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for being here, and everybody at home, thank you for listening. A few things I'd like to talk about. I'm already looking forward to dinner with Albany next year. It's really fun. For the past week, I've been clearing some fire clearing over in the Gill Tract Farm and just giving it some curb appeal and making it look nice. That way there's nobody hiding in the bushes over there and keeping Albany safe. And also the shower program is still going great. I encourage more people to get down there and take showers. The Albany Resource program is a great program. I went and checked it out, and Alice, the lady you guys have hired to run it, is doing a great job. Also, school zones, I still think, are one of the most important issues here in Albany, and I hope we can get it to talk about it on the agenda and get it transferred to Traffic and Safety Committee, because I think Albany needs school zones. I mean, 25 miles an hour is the slowest speed around our schools during drop-off and loading. So I think with school zones, our city, we have #1 schools in the Bay Area. So I think school zones will help our city be #1 plus, like an A+. So there's a few things I'd like to say about the holidays. I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving, and I hope everybody travels safe and has a wonderful Thanksgiving with their family. And I would also like to point out, I was doing some research, and on the website there's the boards, commissions, and committees website, and I recently went to the Democratic Club over at the Village, and I talked with the president of the club, and there's some openings on some committees, and there's the Golden Gate Fields Task Force, I believe is on there, but you guys are going to deleted if nobody applies, and also the homeless task force, and I think the oversight board. Nobody's on the oversight board. I'd like to volunteer if I could be on the homeless task force to keep that open. I think our city is a sanctuary city, and we just started a resource center for the homeless. So before deleting the homeless task force from the community board committee, I'd like to volunteer my time to be on that committee to give my advice to people and help out with what I can. Please and thank you.
Jeremiah, let me just step in here for a minute.
Okay.
Probably make Nicole crazy. Those three task force, the Golden Gate Fields, the Homeless Task Force, and the Oversight Board have completed their work, and they're no longer functioning bodies. They're still there as their minutes and agendas are still posted. So we're not seeking people to be on those. Those are finished task forces. But thank you for volunteering.
Okay, so the city of Albany no longer has a homeless task force?
We do not at this time.
I don't understand that. I mean, we're making great progress, and now we're just deleting our task force.
Jeremiah, we can't discuss this. It's
That's
not on
fine.
the agenda.
So I just want to let you know,
some
thank you.
facts.
I just want to be a volunteer, and thank you for your time. No hard feelings.
Thank you.
Let me know what I could do to help, please.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda? Seeing no one, we will,
Is Elaine,
wait,
which agenda item are you speaking on?
Good evening. My name is Elaine. I've never spoken before, but this week being Thanksgiving, I just wanted to express my thanks to Madam Mayor Peggy, former Mayor Alan Maris, City Council members, the Chief of the Fire Department, Police Department of Albany, and first and foremost, Albany City staff. And I just wanted to express my thanks because Albany is a wonderful city. It's a welcoming city. Solano Stroll, Dinner with Albany, Sanctuary City, and it's a wonderful city, and I am very proud to be a resident of Albany. Thank you.
thank you.
Alan Maris, Albany resident, taxpayer. I'd like to thank Penelope Crumley for her service to the city. Not sure when she retired, but, and wish her well in the future. And wish Nicole well as our interim city manager. She's done a good job for the city in the past, and I expect she'll continue to do the same. I'm here to ask for a future agenda item. Campaign finance is a disaster to our democracy at the state and federal level. I think if we're going to get anything done on this issue, it's probably going to have to be done locally, at least to get it started. But at the last Albany election, some elected council candidates spent 10 times more than others. That was like 2,000 versus 20,000. The most effective way, I think, for a campaign to operate is to use the Alameda County Voters Booklet. That costs $1,000 for each candidate, and that's basically part of your registration to run for city council. In the past, and not so long ago, the city used to publicly finance part of that, and when I ran for city council, I paid $300. And my campaign didn't exceed 1,000. I think that's probably the most effective piece of literature also. It's somewhat vetted by the county. And a lot of the brochures that you receive on your front porch are bright-colored, glossy brochures that give the candidates some sort of name recognition. But I think the candidates should probably get their name recognition with community service rather than all that advertising. When I get those brochures, I stack up my brochures, and I look for the tallest stack of brochures, and I don't vote for that person. Vote for the person with the smallest stack of brochures that land on my porch. Our next election is in a year. I think we have time to develop some campaign finance guidelines for Albany and to provide some sort of guidelines on what's an appropriate campaign strategy, or without impacting First Amendment, but give people their right to free speech, but also give them some guidelines on what's probably acceptable in Albany. So I hope you put this on a future agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak at good of the city? Seeing no one, we'll move on. Council member reports on meetings attended, announcements of future meetings, city manager report. We'll start with Council member Moss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had 3 meetings in my written report. The Housing Authority of California, of the County of Alameda, met on 11/8. Not a lot on the agenda. The most interesting item was a closed session item over a suit with a contractor who had gone out of business and left done some shoddy work on a housing project. The Planning Committee of Alameda County and Recycling Board met on 11/9. All 3 items were non-action items, the most interesting being a discussion of franchise contracts for waste recycling and organic services in different cities around the county. The Programs and Projects Committee of Alameda County Transportation Commission met on the 13th. That actually had an item that has drawn a lot of interest here in Albany, among others, that dealt with the I-80 Gilman Interchange Improvement Project. The item dealt with going for some planning money, and the bridge, the pedestrian bicycle bridge that's going to be part of that project is still very much under discussion as to where that should go. Finally, a meeting that didn't make the written report was the Waste Management Board meeting. And again, there were no action items on that, but there were discussion around commercial recycling report and presentation on composting that was somewhat interesting.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Yes, I have a written report on a couple of the East Bay Regional Park District meetings about the accomplishments of Measure CC, and most importantly for Albany, the renewal of that measure, which is would be a ballot measure for a sub-district of the East Bay Regional Park District to have a parcel fee that helps to support parks. It's been in place now for some years. It's expiring, and the district is looking at renewing it, and we as a city are looking for opportunities for the beach and the bulb for the Albany waterfront, and I think we come back to that later in the meeting. A couple of other things since then. I had the opportunity to go out with volunteers who volunteer with the Resource Center and talking to homeless residents of Albany and Berkeley. It was interesting, and it looks like there's enormous enthusiasm. We may have more volunteers than clients. We have, work to do in getting the word out to people about how many, what the opportunities are, and I'd like to encourage people to work on getting the word out on that. And finally, I attended the dinner of the Pacifica Institute, at which our fire department was honored. Jim Barry gave a talk, and another member of the fire department, whose name is now escaping me, gave a talk, but they represented the department very well, and it was a nice expression of appreciation for what our fire people do.
Thank you. Other meetings people have attended? Michael?
Well, I did attend a meeting with the mayor in the city of Lafayette on new changes to housing policy. This meeting was put on by the League of California Voters, and it gave me an opportunity to drive out to Lafayette on the same roads I bicycle on. And if any of you have ever seen the Steve McQueen movie Bullet, that was what Peggy was subjected to, and I'm happy to say she tolerated it very well. And it was a very informative meeting. There's lots of roadblocks to developing new housing in Albany. Some of the news involved more reporting requirements for our staff, but things are. I think the legislature really took these issues seriously. So did the governor, and I think we'll see, more progress in coming years.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes, the mayor and I attended the mayor's conference in Fremont. The city is, and we heard a presentation by the park board director down there. The city is large and growing, and also of note, it's going to district elections because I believe of its size and of state mandates. And I also attended another meeting of the East Bay Community Energy Board, and I sent around to council already the local development business plan efforts that are underway, and that organization would like comments on those, so those are due, I believe, by the end of November. But the organization, EBCE, is really gelling now. They've had the CEO for some time, but now he's hired about 4 or 5 staff, and they're really aggressively actually putting the organization together and getting all the things they need in place for a spring launch. And one of the things that they're very interested in doing is converting the municipal accounts over as soon as possible, and converting them, I believe, at 100% clean energy, so that if the municipal accounts are willing, at least we can get them in at 100%. If we can't get the general populace in at 100%, opting in at 100% clean energy from the get-go, and that's it.
Thank you. The only two I've participated in that haven't been mentioned are the art opening at the community center a couple of weeks ago. Again, it's a wonderful show. If you haven't been there, stop by the community center on Marin. And I also participated in a climate mayor's conference call. We have a city manager report, or an interim city manager report.
On a couple of items here. The Dartmouth Tot Lot has been facelifted. So take a look at it when you get a chance. It has new paint, new concrete, and soon to be coming a water bottle filling station. So that might be a very interesting thing for the council to see soon.
Did our staff do the painting this time?
Yes, our Public Works Department took this project on specifically. So appreciation to the maintenance staff for the hard work there. Also, the Albany Masonic grand opening, rescheduled from last week due to rain, will occur tomorrow at 5 p.m. Hope to see everyone there for that celebration of the new installations. Sidewalks are coming to council soon. We will have the first schedule of the sidewalk repairs for your review after Traffic and Safety Commission reviews it in January. We expect that to come to you in February. We are also doing a pilot project to see how shaving of smaller sidewalk dips works. And so that will be a smaller project, about 25 total, for an interim solution for some of the smaller sidewalk uplifts as we work towards more long-term solutions with the major repair work. Also, please keep your eyes peeled for the Fall Into Haiku program. Those should be hitting the streets soon. We look to have those placed by the Arts Committee. This is their second year strong doing this event. We have 96 poems getting placed throughout town, so definitely watch for those over the next couple of weeks. And I'm also like to report that I have appointed Isabel Leduc as the interim assistant manager to help fill some of the ongoing responsibilities as we continue to grow in leadership.
Great, thank you very much. Congratulations, Isabel. Okay, item 8-1, elementary school crossing guard program funding update. We have Police Chief McQuiston here to give a report.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. The item on your agenda tonight does not require any action by council. It's an information-only item to provide you with an update on our efforts to secure elementary school crossing guard funding through the end of the current school year. The short version of the report I'm about to give is that staff has secured a commitment from both UC Berkeley and Albany Unified School District representatives to contribute one-time supplemental funds to the city's expenses necessary to continue the crossing guard program at full staffing through the end of the current school year, which would take us to June 15th of 2018. The background is, as council may recall, at the close of the last school year in June of 2017, the city employed 6 guards as permanent part-time employees. Each elementary school had 2 guards assigned at that time. UC Berkeley, under a previously set up MOU, was financially obligated to pay for 2 of those 6 guards, but due to the favorable structure of the MOU, UC Berkeley revenue provided about 54% of our annual crossing guard program budget at that time. Unfortunately, UC Berkeley had to terminate its agreement with the city due to funding issues, budget shortfalls on their end, and consequently at the July 31st, 2017 City Council meeting, I came here and council directed staff to explore interim funding possibilities with our partner agencies of UC Berkeley and the Albany Unified School District. Also at the July 31st meeting, council authorized interim city funding to continue full staffing for the crossing guard program through the end of the calendar year, effectively to the beginning of the winter break coming up in December. The purpose of that was to allow staff time to meet with representatives of the school district and UC to try to secure that funding. Since that time, staff has been communicating and meeting with representatives of UC and with the school district to discuss possible funding options, and this ongoing dialogue did result in a commitment from both UC Berkeley and the Albany Unified School District to contribute one-time supplemental funds to the city expenses necessary to continue the crossing guard program at full staffing through the end of this current school year. So the cost to provide the 6 crossing guards from January through June of 2018 is approximately $43,000. Under the terms of the agreement we reached, the City of Albany will continue to fund the equivalent of 3 crossing guard positions between January and June, while UC and the school district share the remaining costs of approximately $21,500. That is, UC and Albany Unified School District will each contribute approximately $10,750 that is associated with employing 3 additional guards. I would point out that each of those agencies stress that this funding commitment will terminate at the end of the current school year, at which time neither has any further commitment to contribute funds to continue the program in its present form. So at present, under the cost-sharing conditions I've just described, the crossing guard program will continue to be fully staffed through the end of the current school year. However, our partner agencies will not commit funds beyond that date. Future program budgets may be impacted by this reduced revenue stream, necessitating either increased city contributions or reduced program staffing levels. 1 or 2 other things that were discussed at the July 31st City Council meeting were the desire to perform some level of analysis as to where our crossing guards should be instead of following a straight, what you might call an equitable distribution method, and also the pursuit of the development of a warrant policy, you know, what specifically warrants a crossing guard at a particular intersection. Staff has not, we've focused all of our energy with regard to the crossing guard program on securing the funding through the end of the year, and has done no work on any level of analysis or development of a warrant policy. Those issues, I think, are going to become really important at the end of the school year, or perhaps before then, when there's clearly an end to the funding that we secured. And so that we've effectively kicked the can down the road with regard to our current crossing guard program and how it functions and how it's funded. And with that, as I said, this is not an action item for council. It's an informational report, but I'm also here to answer any questions or take any direction from council.
Are there any questions from council?
So you weren't able to do the analysis that we had talked about in terms of where they were needed. Will you be able to do it before the start of the next school year? I mean, we're going to have to make some decisions here. It seems like.
You're right. Decisions will have to be made. I'm not sure, I think, is my answer. I'm not sure if we are going to be able to perform the depth of analysis it probably needs. We can start having those discussions now about what it would take to do that. The simplest method that staff would employ would be to look at, you know, what are the best practices that other agencies are using to determine where crossing guards are. We could do a more comprehensive study of how those programs are funded. But if our partner agencies are unable to contribute, if for example, there's a model out there that requires a contribution from someone outside the city, if they're not able to do that, then that may be a prevalent practice, but it may not be something that's practical. The same thing may apply with a warrant system. We may come up with something that is a model that is, you know, an industry standard or something that's out there. I know, for example, in the MUTCD, the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices, has some statements in there about what warrants a crossing guard, and I think that that would be the authoritative text on how we would do that. That may not lead us to an ideal situation that our community would accept.
Well, it sounds as if unless university and the school district have a big change of heart, which I don't see happening, as far as funding this, it's going to have to come via the city. You know, perhaps there's some grant money out there that we should be pursuing. I don't know about that, but I think, to my mind, the bigger question would be, you know, do we have data on the traffic flows or number of accidents or that kind of information that would help us decide, well, perhaps we need 3 at Buchanan, but we don't need any on, you know, next to Cornell or next to Marin School, or, you know, that kind of data in terms of the actual safety that needs.
We can get it. We can get accident data and the traffic flows.
Yeah, okay. Well, it seems like we're going to have to, you know, again, someone will have to be making a decision. If it's going to come back to us, I think we're going to want to see, you know, where is this required, and you know, perhaps we still need 3 traffic guards at each school, and if that's the case, I guess we'll have to come up with the monies for that. But I'd like to see some data as to, you know, is it really necessary? Could we do it some other way?
Then I think what I should tell you is that I'll come back to council prior to the end of the current school year with some information that you can maybe look at.
Okay.
Could I ask, I've got 2 questions. One is, and it may be a question for Nicole, it seems that we went from the city, the school district, and the village, each paying something on the, well, I guess the village was paying closer to half than a third. But then the city and the school district were splitting the other.
That's not correct.
No,
The
no.
school district does not, until this interim agreement, contribute any
They were not
monies.
contributing before this agreement, so this
Never
is
that I'm
a
aware
new.
of.
Okay, good. Then the other question was whether the, I'm sorry, the other question has flown out of my mind. I'll come back to it. Why don't we let Michael ask his question?
What do we know about other cities in the region and who funds their programs? And I also want to apologize. When this issue came up in July, I was not at the meetings. But back to the question, I've seen crossing guards in Moraga and other local cities. What typically is done and how is this handled?
I don't know if I could answer what is typical. When we have looked at it, we see a real mixed bag. We have, there's basically, there's two, well, I would say there's three kind of functional aspects to this. One is, how is it funded? And we see a mixed bag of funding. We see city funded, we see splits where the school district takes 50% or pays 50%. And we see other models as well. The second one is how it's managed, who manages it, and we've seen police departments, we've seen public works departments, we've seen school districts that manage it, and it's becoming more commonplace to simply contract it out. And I may have mentioned at the July meeting that I'd previously looked at what the costs of contracting out our current level of services would be, and unfortunately it was much higher than what we were budgeted for, and so we walked away from that at that time. Now I'm having the same problem. There was one, two, and so there's who runs it, who pays for it, and the warrant process, basically how they determine where crossing guards go. And again, it depending on how it's run and who's writing the checks, it may vary. There's some programs have very well-developed warrant processes for how they do that. And the one that comes to mind, I can't recall the Southern California agency, the school district has to request that the study be done. Once the study is done, if it meets a warrant, then the city gives the school district a cost estimate of what it would cost to employ someone to do what they want done. So the answer is it's a mixed bag. We can get more detail. I could give you I actually had at the July meeting, I had that information ready to go if someone should ask.
I did remember my other question, and this was the one that was more for Nicole, which is there a particular pot in the budget where from which you're drawing the funding to backfill what was lost?
So we used our funding line item. So as I think you mentioned in the July meeting, we have a budget that says, here's the money for the 6 guards, but it assumed the revenue stream behind that.
Mm-hmm.
So that money is in effect in there, and we've been drawing down on that. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but for the January to June calculation, I looked at what our actual expenses have been to date and then made those projections on what it was going to be moving forward. I don't know if that addresses.
Okay. I think I'm hearing that it's still coming out of the police budget. You're not transferring any money from another part of the budget to cover the crossing guard deficit.
And previously, we had budgeted it basically at half the price it is now because of the offset from the university.
Yeah, there was that confusing. Essentially, you had a contingent item in the budget, but it didn't show as contingent. So we thought we had budgeted for 6 people, but in fact, we had budgeted for 3 and had a contingent budget. If we got the money, we would have 6.
Right. And those two processes did not directly overlap, and I think that's where some of the confusion occurred.
I'm not sure I understand that.
The UC and that memorandum of understanding coming to be closed versus our budgeting process with the quantity of 6 guards.
Can I just also add that any shortcoming as a result of the way this has worked out, I anticipate coming out of the police department budget through salary savings for our currently vacant positions.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just wondering if we're going to go to the, I have just one comment, but we can go to the public first.
Well, if you don't have a question, then yes, we will go to the public. Was there any public comment? Okay, we have some public comment.
Alan Maris, Albany resident. I have 2 granddaughters, so I'm really concerned. And I think all of you are as well. I'm a little concerned that we're not showing the commitment. We're concerned about the money and not the kids, and I doubt that that's your feeling or your approach. So safe routes to schools, I think, is a source of funding, and I think we're already getting some of that. Maybe that's a possibility for additional funding. I know the school district is facing a structural budget deficit, but I think this should be an important issue for the school district as well. I mean, the schools are a big part of Albany, and we really got to take care of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Seeing no one, we'll bring it back to council for comments. Vice Mayor Pilch?
I just want to support the warrant process. I think that choosing the locations where we need, and this speaks to the kids, I believe, is we need to protect the kids where they need to be protected. So a warrant process where we analyze the data as much as possible to figure out where a guard is actually needed is really important towards where they to deciding how many we need and where they should be placed, I believe. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd be interested in taking a look at the possibility of a broader program for safe routes to school, which Alan Maris mentioned, and we have had I know that we've had grant funding in the past for safe routes to school programs with walking buses, and that there was even a biking train. I don't know if that is still going on or not. But it seems to me that the crossing guard program is really part of the bigger picture of getting kids to attend school, to travel in greener and safer ways to school. To be as safe and as low impact as we can be. And I'm not sure, although I agree that a warrant process looking at actual safety factors related to crossing guards makes a lot of sense. I think it might also make a lot of sense to move the administration of this from the police department into either youth or recreation, into a department that would take responsibility for a broader approach, crossing guards, but also the other kinds of things like organizing walking buses and walking trains, and using the crossing guards as not only people who interrupt the flow of traffic, but people who can carry messages about safety and about alternative ways of getting to school. And I would see the police still being the ones training the crossing guards, but the actual administration of the program, it seems to me, could potentially be done at less expense by other personnel, and also done in a way that ties it into other aspects of getting kids to school safely and in a low-impact way.
Are there any other comments?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Well, I've got some comments, and it's funny. I'll just preface these comments by saying, without making any effort to observe what goes on in crosswalks, I happened to see a couple of incidents just in the last week, being on Solano and being at the corner of Santa Fe and Marin in my car, that raised some issues for me. So let's do the one by Marin School first. Southbound on Santa Fe, I was at that intersection where the crossing guard was, watching the crossing guard. Early morning sun was in my face. It was difficult to see. There's a lot of traffic. The crossing guard's responsibility, I believe, is to monitor the traffic and try to control the traffic. And just as he was about to pull his flag in and I was thinking about making a left turn, 5 or 6 little boys sprinted at full speed right through that intersection without even looking, because they thought they were going to be safe because that crossing guard was out there. This is not safe behavior for children, and it is not the role of crossing guards, I believe, to be in loco parentis. They're not there to scold children, and they don't have the time. They're there to monitor traffic. The second incident was on Solano Avenue, where there was a crossing guard with her flag out on Solano Avenue, and a middle school student rode her bike without looking right through the intersection, which is illegal, went up on the sidewalk, took a quick glance at the car that was coming southbound, ready to cross Solano, rode right across the other intersection through the crosswalk, and then got back on the sidewalk and continued north to the middle school. And I'm going, really? But again, the traffic guard's role is not to be a disciplinarian and to tell these kids what they're doing is dangerous and illegal. The parents need to be out there doing that. Ultimately here, it's the responsibility of parents for their children's safety when those kids go from their homes to the schools. And I was an Albany parent. My son graduated from high school in 2010 and UC Berkeley in 2014. He grew up in University Village for my first, 5 years or so in there. So I'm going to be, as often is the case on this council, to stick in the mud and say it is not the council's responsibility to provide this kind of safety. I think the council's responsibility is to provide safe infrastructure, safe sidewalks, which is what we're trying to do with our sidewalk parcel tax, the safe routes to school, the bulb outs, all that infrastructure stuff. That's what we do, and I think we meet that commitment pretty well. I don't think it is, and I think the traffic guard program is not designed to be in loco parentis, and neither is the role of the city. And there's a second issue, which is a collective action problem, which it is clearly not the city's responsibility to try to solve, and that is individual parents think, oh, it's safer for me if I drive my kid to school. But if all these parents show up in their cars at the elementary schools, and this is true all over the country, this is not unique to Albany, you have all these kids running in and out of these cars, trying to get to school. It's like running the gauntlet with cars, it's zooming in and out of there. And the net effect of each individual parent thinking that they're trying to provide more safety for the children is to make it more dangerous for all of them. That also is not a problem the city can solve. I think what is needed is more engagement of the parents in a thoughtful way about how they keep their kids safe when they walk to school. I walked my kid to school for many years, so I think I practiced what I preached. I'm not real excited about having the city continue to fund this program in the long term. I think it's the school district's responsibility, and I think it's the parents' responsibility. So I may be in the minority on this council, but I think our emphasis needs to be on providing safe infrastructure and also programs in the summer for these kids, which we do without getting any ADA money for it. And I think, so we really are committing a lot of our resources to Albany's kids already.
I'll keep it as brief as I can. We have a lot of other things on the agenda tonight, but again, I think more data would be very helpful to make those decisions about where traffic monitors should be. if we could expand it, I know we've already done bulb outs and different infrastructure changes in a lot of the places where these monitors are. If any other things could be done, as Michael says, we're sort of, the city should be concentrating on infrastructure and the shape of the crosswalks or how long the lights go. But if any of those ideas come out of this more data, I think that would be useful for us. Ultimately, as much as I would love to have the school kind of step up and do more of this, my view is that, we're talking about crossing streets. The streets are city owned, and we manage those. So I think it is going to ultimately come back to us. I'd love it if we could find other funding. I'd love it if we could, have some other city agency handle some of the responsibility, be it educating kids or, managing the kids rushing out into the streets. But one way or another, it's going to be in the city's realm. And so that's my 2 cents at this point.
Thank you. Any last comments? Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Just that I want to echo Councilmember Barnes's comment that parents deciding to drive their kids to school more often than not makes things less safe.
If I can just add, and I'll also be mindful of the fact that you have a full agenda. Councilmember Barnes triggered a thought in me. The agenda topic in July, at July 31st meeting, had to do with the reduction in staffing and how we were going to cope with that and the funding and whatnot. And so I really didn't present much information on what it's like trying to actually administer the program, and I don't intend to give you a full report on that. But two things come to mind after hearing the comments from council. One is in whether it's the police department or any other department that's responsible for this program, today is a good example of some of the why it can be problematic to administer. We didn't have a crossing guard at Buchanan and Jackson this morning, and so consequently an officer is there doing that instead of something else. That's a pretty well-paid crossing guard that is working well below the job classification. And then consequently, office staff goes out there later. My person who's my primary person to respond to requests for public records and other support function inside the police department had to stop what she was doing, grab a sign, and go out to Buchanan and Jackson several times today because that crossing guard wasn't there. And that, from a program administration standpoint, that's really problematic for me when I'm trying to get other things done, to have to cover that way with frankly, much higher paid staff. The other thing is data was not a big, I was prepared at July 31st to share one piece of data because we were talking about eliminating 3 crossings initially at that meeting. And so one piece of data that I did have, and this is, you triggered this thought, is that I had looked in making my recommendations at the time to reduce the crossing guard staffing by 3. I had looked at previous locations where we had taken away crossing guard staffing, and I'd looked at where our crossing guards were for a period of 5 years preceding the July 31st meeting. And we had not experienced any accidents as a result of removing crossing guards at any of those intersections where we had previously removed them, or at the crossing guard controlled intersections, except for one. And it was Buchanan and Jackson, and it was under circumstances very similar to what you describe, and that is that a child just went out and actually completely dismissive of the crossing guard. The crossing guard ended up being a witness against the child who ran into the street and got struck by a car at Buchanan and Jackson Street. So we, in employing these crossing guards and putting them in these intersections, and the city attorney might be able to weigh in better on this, it's a legal term I'm about to put out there, but in a way where we're entering into a special relationship with them, in that there's an assumption that we are there to make them safe, safely get them across the intersection, and that if that doesn't happen, we haven't met our obligation. So for what that's worth, but I'm sure we'll have more discussion before the end of the school year about the program administration and other things, and I'll endeavor to get some information, perhaps go to Traffic and Safety Commission and have some of that vetted before I bring it back to council.
Thank you. Okay, anything else? All right.
If there's a report on the implementation of the Safe Routes to School grant, that might be a helpful thing for
Sure,
us to
some of
look
that
at.
information was included in the July 31st report, but we can definitely update that, and that is still an ongoing program that's very comprehensive in its approach.
Right.
And I guess, talking about that, I'd be interested if this type of personnel can be funded out of Safe Routes to Schools, because a lot of times grants are very specific in how they can be administered or funded or whatever. Okay. 9-1, Ordinance 2017-07, first reading to consider amendments to Chapter 20.20.110, medical marijuana dispensaries of the Albany Municipal Code related to marijuana regulations. Do we have a staff report, please?
Yes, good evening. Before you tonight is the introduction and first reading of draft amendments to Section 2020-110 related to marijuana policies in the Albany Municipal Code. Just to refresh the council's memory, I'm sure you all recall that in November of last year, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act was voted into place. It became legal on November 8th. With that, there are state licensing requirements for commercial recreational marijuana activity, which are underway at the state, and licensing is expected to commence after the first of the year. At the time this went into place, and at the time the licensing commencement date was announced, it was intended to provide time for jurisdictions to prepare regulations and policies regulating recreational and medical marijuana cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and taxation. So this year, on April 3rd and again on June 5th, the City Council discussed potential policies as it pertains to our local requirements. And ultimately, the Council adopted Resolution 2017-16 and directed staff to work with the Planning and Zoning Commission to extend the existing prohibition on marijuana and expand the regulations to include recreational marijuana. In particular, the council had also asked for additional provisions to be included in the ordinance, the first of which was the prohibition of outdoor personal use cultivation, prohibiting deliveries within the city limits, and providing regulations for indoor personal use cultivation and landlord consent for rental properties. Under the AUMA, the following is permitted for personal cultivation. There may be up to 6 living plants that can be cultivated within a private residence by a person over the age of 21. An adult may legally possess up to 28.5 grams of marijuana or 4 grams of concentrated marijuana. Municipalities do retain the authority to regulate or ban outdoor cultivation. And municipalities can reasonably regulate but cannot ban indoor personal cultivation. With respect to commercial cultivation, a municipality retains the authority to regulate or ban commercial cultivation and manufacturing for recreational or medical marijuana. Additionally, a municipality may permit or restrict deliveries within the city limits. So the Planning Commission twice reviewed draft regulations. Their initial review was on September 13th, and it was ultimately continued to a date certain of October 25th. As part of that initial review, the Commission directed staff to review the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, which was signed into place on June 17th of this year. And in doing so, they requested that definitions and language within our ordinance be consistent with the provisions of state law. So with that, kind of the big picture thing you would notice is that references to marijuana have been eliminated, and instead we've referred to marijuana as cannabis throughout the entire ordinance. We've also changed the title to reflect cannabis regulations. Currently it reflects just medical marijuana, so it's a much broader approach. We've incorporated those definitions from the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, And we've clarified personal cultivation regulations, so it is allowed indoors, and the commission also noted that this accessory structures, which can also serve as greenhouses, are also considered indoors, so that is included within our ordinance. One thing, though, that the commission wanted to have included, they honored the council's direction about continuing the prohibition, although I think their feelings about the issue were a little bit different. But in recognizing the council's direction, they included a clause both whereas in their resolution, requesting that this be revisited at a future date. And as part of the ordinance before you tonight, there is a sunset provision that the ordinance shall automatically expire and be of no further effect 2 years following its effective date unless a later enacted ordinance extends the sunset date or repeals the provision. And the thought behind this was that within a 2-year window, we would have a better understanding of the state licensing and how it's been in effect. And the ordinance could be revisited at that point in time. So with that, we have draft ordinance 2017-07, which would formally amend section 2020-1110, currently titled Medical Marijuana Dispensaries of the Albany Municipal Code. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Go ahead.
If this sunsets and the council has not acted, what rules apply? What's the default?
There wouldn't be any regulations in place other than the city's general zoning ordinance. So that's, I think that the other option that was discussed at the Planning Commission was to simply have a report back after a particular time period, either 1 year or 2 years, on the effectiveness of the regulations and require some affirmative action to either extend or to repeal the regulations. So from a legal standpoint, I do have a bit of a concern about the Planning Commission recommendation to have an automatic expiration of the ordinance if no action is taken.
Okay, or we could also extend the time period from 2 years to 3 years.
Does this give the council an opportunity to change it before the 2 years if they so desired?
Yeah, the council can change the ordinance at any time, so you're not limited. I think the 2-year period, Ann can correct me if I'm wrong, is the thought was it's going to take some time. The state is supposed to have the regulations ready to go January 1st. That seems to be lagging a bit. There will be a time period after those come into place for local jurisdictions to have some experience on how the interplay between the state regulations and their local ordinances is working and what's being effective and what isn't and what type of problems aren't being encountered. So that was the time period that was come up, but certainly the council at any time can change the ordinance if it deems it necessary.
Are there any other questions from council?
Yeah, at the risk of making a bad joke about having smoking something, I thought we had the one thing that we were going to allow was deliveries. Okay, so someone else remembers that. And so I see that the ordinance prohibits deliveries. There may have been a miscommunication here.
Go ahead.
I think so as well. I was going to bring that up in comments, but I'm quite sure that we talked about the necessity of, especially for medical marijuana, and given the difficulty of distinguishing, what's a real medical use and what isn't, I thought that we had come to a conclusion that that there was a consensus that delivery should be permitted so that people who need it for medicinal purposes are not prohibited from getting it that way.
We can strike that provision out of the code, and
Maybe we just heard that wrong.
Does anyone else?
Well, my concern is, and I think it was an issue at the time, but I don't remember, not because I was smoking something, but because I'm over 60, and that, which has similar effects, is the enforceability of banning deliveries. I'm not in favor of promulgating rules that we just can't enforce. But I see Craig squirming there.
We did get some info from the police department that it might be difficult to enforce that because they essentially have to catch somebody in the act of making a delivery, and that's unlikely to occur. It's certainly much easier to address regulations, to enforce regulations that regulate activities at a particular location, such as cultivation. I mean, you can look at that location and see if illegal cultivation's happening and issue citations or other enforcement actions, but the delivery prohibition would be a challenge to enforce.
No questions.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions from council? Are there any public comments?
Evening, Mayor and Council. So with regard to deliveries, I understand that you're only allowed to have a limited amount of marijuana in possession. So if you're delivering and you're sort of like a pizza truck and you've got 12 deliveries to make, how do you deal with the limitations? The other problem is, if I understand the law correctly, and the problem with dealing with handling the money is that most banks won't deal with you, so there's a lot of cash. So you have delivery trucks carrying, or delivery vehicles carrying a lot of, or significant amount of marijuana and a lot of cash. Sounds like that's the problem that they're worried about, unless I'm missing something from an enforcement point of view. Unless the idea is to try to prevent people from smoking or having marijuana, in which case that's a different level of issue. Thanks.
Other public comments?
Good evening. I'm Doug Donaldson, resident of Albany, and a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. When I got the draft ordinance from you, I was surprised to see that it was prohibiting the marijuana. I know that the Proposition 64 passed by a huge majority, I think like in Albany, maybe 74%. And so it took me a little while to wrap my mind around the whole idea that we wanted to prohibit it when we had a voter mandate a huge voter mandate in favor of it. I understand the difficulty, after looking into it, of developing regulations, and I know you read in the paper of the problems that San Francisco, all of the cities are having doing this, and it's probably okay that Albany is not leading the charge with our small staff and small city to try to develop a set of regulations to implement this by January 1st. And I appreciate your rationale on that. But still, I think the majority of the planning and zoning commissioners think that this is a topic that needs to be very pursued aggressively in a way, and find out ways to implement our own regulations and to allow the sale and dispensary of marijuana under Proposition 64 in our city, not prohibit it, in other words. My recollection is that planning and zoning wanted a one-year sunset clause. The ordinance in front of you has a 2-year sunset clause, but I would certainly ask that you put it on the work program for staff and for planning and zoning to work on regulations with all deliberate speed, really, because I think that that's the way Albany voted. So that's my thought on it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? We'll bring it back to council for final comments.
Well, I can start. I mean, remember years ago when this first came up, we wanted to liberalize marijuana rules in the city, but there was a conflict with trying to restrict locations of marijuana dispensaries within 500 feet or 1,000 feet, I don't remember which, from schools and whatnot. And when we actually got around to carefully drawing those big circles, turns out there wasn't any place for it to be in Albany except underneath the freeways, where I suspect that stuff goes on anyway. We just don't know about it. So I don't see that as being a different situation now than we've ever had. I think this town sees itself as a good place and a safe place for families, and I think most parents would still agree to the fact that they don't want dispensaries within 500 feet of their schools or parks. And so I think we're still back in the same situation. That's one point. Two, as far as I can tell, and I never went inside, at 99 Ranch Market upstairs, there's kind of a legit Asian massage parlor upstairs above one of those boba tea places. And then there's what obviously looks like a marijuana dispensary. If you get on Google Maps and ask Google Maps, how long does it take to get from City Hall to 99 Ranch Market? It's about 90 seconds. So I really don't feel like not having a dispensary within Albany is a huge burden on our consuming population. So, I think voting on these rules on the state level is sort of like, well, we're voting for other people. But we didn't ask the question when that proposition passed that Doug Donaldson mentioned, whether or not that meant you wanted a dispensary within 500 feet of your parks and your schools. And I think our citizenry would be much more conservative if that question had been addressed in that way. And so I don't want to just repeat what we've already been through in this town. So I'm perfectly happy with some kind of sunset provision. But right now we basically have a prohibition. We're not really changing anything. Okay, we can examine it 2 or 3 years from now when the dust settles in such a way that if we don't get around to it, our regulatory ability falls to zero, as Craig discussed. But I can tell you, from my perspective, as a former chemistry editor at UC Berkeley, there are so many unanswered questions about what even constitutes intoxication. How do you test it? I mean, there are so many things that were not thought through before this was passed that really govern how you can regulate medical marijuana and sobriety issues, et cetera, et cetera. We've worked through a lot of these with alcohol already, but it's way more complicated if you talk to chemists how to do this sort of stuff with marijuana. So I'm perfectly happy to let somebody else be aggressive, and we can sit back and watch for 2 or 3 years and see how this plays out.
Yeah, well, a question, Robert Chasty brought up the idea of if we allow delivery, does that, cause a problem for the delivery truck that might have more than 1 ounce of?
No, the limit that was referenced earlier of, I think it's 28 grams, that's a limit on the quantity one can possess for personal use. That wouldn't apply to a commercial operation that's properly licensed.
Okay.
State and local level. So that wouldn't be a limitation. They wouldn't have to deliver 1 ounce at a time, for example.
So a delivery truck would be, in fact, an extension of the facility that was causing delivery.
The cash, is an issue. I mean, typically, because of some of the federal laws, there may be an inability to use credit cards or other typical methods for payment. So there may be a situation where delivery individuals are collecting cash. I don't quite know how that would work.
Right. We may be going to bitcoins on things like this. Who knows? But I guess my comments would be I'm glad that staff was able to change it over to cannabis, which is a small change, but that does make more sense to me. And I'm okay with this 2-year sunset thing. We could have done 1 year sunset. You could do a longer sunset, but 2 years should allow us to take a look at this and how it's working in cities where they've allowed it. I presume Berkeley, I don't know, Richmond, perhaps, and see what we can learn from that. Albany's a small city, and I'm not sure that we could come up with all the right regulations that fit our size city in, right off the bat. So a 2-year period should allow us to take a look at that. Also to take a look and see what the, what cities are actually getting out of it. There could be some money here that we're leaving on the table by not allowing it. And after 2 years, we should have a better sense of that. And then finally, with delivery, if this isn't an issue for the delivery truck, I think it does make sense to allow people that need medical marijuana, in particular, to have it delivered to their door. We use any number of prescription drugs in our family related to diabetes. They come through the U.S. mail and UPS. So I don't know why this would be different. So with that, I think I can support what's before us tonight.
Rochelle, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I can. I feel very much in alignment with what I've heard. I would be very much in agreement with the concerns of Mr. Donaldson if we were an isolated town, if this were going to make it difficult for people to buy marijuana in accordance with the law, I would be very concerned. But because we are a tiny city surrounded by other cities that are going to be making sure that they do have dispensaries, especially since you will be able to grow your own or you will be able to have it delivered, I just don't see any barrier to people getting cannabis if they want it. And under these circumstances, I'm very comfortable with a tiny town waiting to see how things play out with the bigger players.
So when we considered this, when we considered our direction to planning and zoning for what they should craft for us, I voted that we do the prohibition, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of caution, and I regret that vote. I probably thought that, okay, it's prudent to be cautious, but from what I've learned since then, I think I was wrong to vote in that way. This is not a brave new world. Many states are doing this already and have learned what works and what doesn't work. And many of our surrounding cities already have had regulations in place for quite some time for medical marijuana, and have already crafted regulations, their own ordinances for recreational marijuana as well. So we have plenty of material to copy from. We don't have to go out on our own limb about this. In fact, a council member from Emeryville encouraged me to use their attorney to, because they had come out of the gate right away in November, a year ago now, to start crafting their ordinances. So, I think we can do that, and just as we successfully copied Berkeley's soda tax ordinance, we could easily copy someone else's ordinances. So I'm going to vote a symbolic no on this, an emphatic no. Our own Planning and Zoning Commission was really concerned about the direction we were taking. That's significant. That is the first time I've ever heard of that happening. And as I go around to mayors' conferences and other meetings, other cities, it's clear, are embracing this and either getting their ordinances in place to allow either at least medical, if not recreational. And some of the cities are frankly thrilled by the business opportunities, these business opportunities that are coming up for this. As far as I know of our surrounding towns, only ourselves and Piedmont are doing a prohibition, and Piedmont makes some sense to me because they have no business, they have no place to put a dispensary, so that makes a little bit of sense. But they're the only ones. El Cerrito is doing it, Emeryville is doing it, Berkeley's already done it, Oakland, of course, and many of the other Alameda County cities. I think it's a vote to, I think a prohibition puts us out of step and out of touch with the city as was pointed out, most of whom voted in favor of recreational cannabis and who previously voted in favor of medical marijuana. It deprives us of income. I feel it's anti-business, and I think it's somewhat, how can we allow liquor stores 500 feet from schools? How do we allow our grocery stores to sell liquor, and we're going to say, okay, cannabis is we're not going to allow that in our little town. In terms of placement, we have a perfect place for it. We have the CMX zone, and I would be in favor of nothing but the CMX zone. It's out, it's away from all the residential area, perfect place for growing dispensaries, et cetera. I think this makes us look like a small town in the worst way. We can't always be the one who says no. Many people talk about the reputation we have. We're getting a reputation. I think this is part of it. Most people talk about that in terms of the reputation we have of refusing businesses. This is another business we're refusing. And the possibility of losing state funding due to our prohibition is something I'm concerned about as well. So finally, if you feel like we must pass this, I feel like 2 years is way too long. Maybe a year even is too long. We should revisit this at the earliest possible opportunity. We have a perfect site. We have the possibility of creating ordinances that make it slightly more favorable for businesses to locate here, and maybe make them businesses want to locate in Albany instead of surrounding cities, and therefore contribute to our tax base, contribute to our revenue. So I think I've said enough at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think I have to agree with probably the majority of the council, but especially what Rochelle said, that we're not depriving people of the ability to grow their own, to have it delivered, to buy it really close. So I'm certainly in favor of the 2-year wait period. I don't think we need to be the first ones doing this, although I would agree that we wouldn't be the first, but I think we can wait. So I think the only thing from an administrative point is, are we all clear that delivery is okay? That's changing the ordinance. Are we all in agreement with that? Mm-hmm. Are you nodding over there? Okay. So, and does that, you got that piece? And a 2-year waiting period. So with that.
Mayor, I'm sorry to, I want to make sure to address Craig's concern and my concern about us, this issue falling through the cracks and not having any ordinance in place after 2 years. So are we going to try to address that by just referring to a waiting period? I'm not sure how the best way to go about that.
The way the ordinance is currently drafted, if the council were to take no action for a period of 2 years, the ordinance would automatically expire. The alternative would be a report back with direction to staff to come back at a particular time to bring forth either a review of the ordinance and or proposed regulations.
Okay, let's think about that. Can we put in there then report for staff to report back to council, let's say in 20 months? Because what I'd like to end up with is, if we're going to change the ordinance, that we can do it in the 24-month period. So if we said 20 months, that would give time to rework the ordinance. Does that make sense?
That strikes me as too short a time. I think you should do it in a year.
Like,
20 months is longer than a year.
well, I was leaving it at 2 years, so I backed it up a little bit to give staff time.
Yes, we can do that. It'd be 20 months from the effective date.
Okay, if that's the wish of the rest of the council.
As an aside, I would like to see again, some of those circle diagrams around you could probably just dig them up out of the record of our schools, our parks, public buildings, the 500-foot or 1,000-foot perimeters, because this is a little abstract, and I would like the citizenry to be notified so that that they're aware of the issue that if we do not prohibit dispensaries in Albany, that means there's going to be one down the street from them, and perhaps they will show up and express some concerns about that.
Okay, now I know that Vice Mayor Pilch would like a shorter time frame. What do other council members think?
We're at 2 years now with 20 months, the review starting at 20 months. I'm fine with that. That's, I think, it was P&Z that gave us the 2-year figure, so I'm happy to respect that.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with the planning and zoning recommendation on that. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on, so we could do a shorter time span, but I think that slightly longer period allows a little more ability to look at what's going on outside, and it's, you know, this may be, you know, other states have been doing this for a while, but on the other hand, California is unique, and I think it will tell us something.
Okay, Rochelle?
Yeah, I'm okay with the proposal. I do want to say that not every experience has been benign, and my view is probably somewhat influenced by my commute at one time down down San Pablo Avenue to University. And on San Pablo, there was a problem dispensary in Berkeley, a very serious problem dispensary. Now, there is also a very serious problem liquor store on San Pablo. And the dispensary has been closed down. The liquor store is still there. And I do see the disconnect there. But I don't think that just because, because of that disconnect, because of the different histories, that we need to jump in without seeing other folks working out those kinds of kinks.
Just as a clarification.
2 years is good.
Can our city attorney explain to us what abilities local governments have to regulate alcohol sales?
But
Trying not to violate the Brown Act.
we do have the authority when essentially licenses are issued by the state, alcohol beverage control, but they do give local governments an opportunity to object to the location of alcoholic sale facilities if based on certain criteria. The primary one that comes to mind is overconcentration of liquor stores in a particular location. So there is some ability to kind of veto the location of new liquor stores. And once they're there, it's much more difficult to force the relocation or closure of a liquor store.
Thanks.
Okay, so do you have?
I just have one clarification question. For the 20-month check-in, so I'm inclined to put this on the commission work plan, Planning and Zoning Commission work plan for the 2019-2021 plan. But for the 20-month review, do you want to be the first body to receive the report, or would you like Planning and Zoning Commission to see that first? And we could.
My preference would be it could go to Planning and Zoning.
Okay.
Everybody's nodding? Okay. So you have what you need. And so I think what we need is a motion to introduce the ordinance for first reading with these changes. Is that correct?
So moved.
Second.
Full council?
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
No.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. Thank you. Okay, unfinished business. 10-1, formulation of a city council subcommittee regarding the Albany waterfront. Councilmember Nason, this is your recommendation. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, this is a follow-up to the letter that we sent to the East Bay Regional Park District with so much going on regarding park funding, including the park bond, statewide park bond, the potential renewal of Measure CC. I think this is really the time to try to get a little bit more specific about the planning for the funding of the transition of the Albany waterfront parklands into the East Bay Regional Park District. And I think that having a subcommittee of the council meeting with Park District representatives would be a way of going about that without creating a tremendous new set of burdens on our interim city manager.
Are there any questions from council?
You think this is something that we need beyond what staff is currently doing?
I do. I think that it's something that has to be driven. It needs a driving force. It needs people who are pursuing it very actively. And it's always better to put it up to the elected officials if they're willing and able to do it. I think it would be very helpful.
Subcommittee of two? Do we have two people who are willing and able to do it?
Let's hold on just a minute. Are there any other questions? Are there any public comments? Come on up.
Alan Maris, Albany resident. I believe we've had a memorandum of understanding with the Park District on all the work to be done on the bulbs so that it can be taken in by the state and the East Bay Regional Park District. What's been accomplished so far in terms of those goals? We were going to look for grants and funding. Have we done any of that? We were going to try to come up with some process, shared process for doing all of the reconstruction or improvements on the waterfront. What's the status?
Nicole, would you like to answer that, or Jeff?
Sure, and I'll also invite Jeff Bond, our community development director, up. Currently, we're going through the CEQA process, so that's an integral part of implementing the plan, but first the environmental analysis needs to occur.
So has the CEQA process started? What's the status?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Yes, Nicole is correct. We are in the process. The City Council at a recent meeting approved a request for proposals to hire consultants to prepare the environmental impact report, which is required under state law and before any physical changes to the bulb can be made. So we do anticipate selecting a consultant in the next month or two and bringing that contract back to you for approval. And once that environmental review is completed, that's a major milestone in terms of working out some of the issues that might come up with implementation of the plan. We work through those issues, and then we can go back with the Park District and other agencies that might be able to fund various improvements and begin to implement the concepts that were embedded in the MOU that was approved about a year ago, I guess.
Yeah.
My recollection is that one of the promises we got from the Regional Park District was that they had such good grant writing skills, they would help us write a grant to help pay for the CEQA process. Did that happen?
They have offered to help us with grant writing. Right now, we're paying for the environmental review out of, I believe it was the reserve. I'm not sure if I'm using the right terminology. Budget should, I think it was reserve that carried forward from the last fiscal year. But we certainly will be collaborating with the Park District. Getting grant funding for environmental review is a challenge. It's not, people like to write grants for physical improvements. They're not as excited about writing grants for EIRs.
So this is $150,000, something about that?
More than that. I wish I remembered now exactly what the council approved in that, but it was I think $200,000 to $300,000 range.
But I mean, just ballpark in your experience, that's what a CEQA process takes?
Yes.
So when are we going to hear something concrete about this? When will we have this CEQA report?
Again, would the council like me to respond?
Yeah, well, excuse me.
We would expect to have the environmental review completed in roughly a year after the contract is executed.
And when will the contract be executed?
Early 2018.
Early 2018. I am very much in favor of this committee to put pressure on this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening, Mayor and Council, Robert Chasty. So the thing that the Park District responds to is engagement from a city, including the elected officials. Usually they want to hear from the mayor. And given the city's size, you'd have a mayor and a council member. But it's not that staff can't do it, and it's not that staff shouldn't be engaged, because the staff actually makes all the pieces put together and puts the jigsaw on the table. But you need to have the public officials also engaged. Otherwise, the Park District isn't sure whether the city is really in favor. And the elected officials are more able to put the push behind making it happen. So I think this is a good idea. And I think it'll speed this up, too.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yeah, we'll bring it back to council. Final comments. I would like to volunteer to serve, and I'd also like Rochelle to be part of this subcommittee.
I'd very much like to. Thank you.
I move that it be done, that it be so.
That was easy. Second?
I'll second that.
Okay, poll the council, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes. All right, we got work to do. Okay, 10-2, Economic Development Strategic Plan, Implementation Plan. Thank you, Jeff, for your help. May we have a staff report?
Yes. As you may recall, in September of this year, the council adopted the Economic Development Strategic Plan. I'd like to acknowledge that our chair, Robert Chasty, is here in the audience and who will be speaking to this item as well. In my introduction, basically the Economic Development Strategic Plan, when we presented this to you for approval, we also indicated that we would be developing this implementation plan, which really is the working document, the living document that will see us through achieving the goals expressed in the larger Economic Development Strategic Plan. The matrix that you have attached to your staff report goes into detail on the who and the how, the timelines, and also the metrics in terms of how we will be realizing achievement towards implementing our goals. Typically, the lead is a city department, but you'll also see that the Economic Development Committee has a lot of responsibility to assist with implementation as well. And this is nothing new. All of the goals and actions are taken directly from the strategic plan, simply put into a more user-friendly document. And again, we envision this being updated regularly with updates both to the committee and to the council. In terms of short-term or recent accomplishments, I'd just like to highlight a couple of things, as we understand that this is an important thing to get underway, and we've been doing that, and the committee has been leading the charge with that as well. You may have seen in some of our recent announcements that Mechanics Bank has been very supportive of our efforts towards economic development by facilitating an agreement with us to utilize their parking lot for public parking and off-bank hours, and I'd like to publicly acknowledge their support. Also, the Economic Development Committee has been working hard in formulating new subcommittees to implement the strategic plan, specifically through the implementation plan. These include a subcommittee working in coordination with our Arts Committee to promote arts on Solano and San Pablo. Also a long-term subcommittee looking at retention and recruitment, as well as a subcommittee looking at creative solutions to staffing. We also have the operational and organizational study for the finance department, which the council has seen the request for proposals and authorized that request for proposals. We have proposals back and we'll be conducting those interviews. I'm saying this because as part of that process, it also includes review of our business license program to make sure it's as effective as possible so that we don't lose businesses waiting to get their approvals. And lastly, our planning department has been very active in working towards implementing their responsibilities within this strategic plan, mostly in code changes. And we have retained the services of a planning consultant to help us with that initial review of the code changes. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have and also invite Robert Chasey up if he would so like to.
Are we?
Hold on, let's let Robert go ahead and speak.
Are we doing questions, or are you going to?
Let's give Robert an opportunity, and then we can ask questions of both Nicole and Robert.
So I know you're busy, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, and the plan is really truncated for easy reading. I just want to say a couple of things. First, I wanted to thank our consultants, your consultants that you hired to help us do this. Amalia Cunningham, Ben Noble, and David Greensfelder, and to tell you what a wonderful job that Nicole has been doing in facilitating this and making it happen. Your interim manager has been doing double duty. She's done a great job. Committee is really happy with what she's done. With regard to the strategic plan, there are a lot of parts to it, and I don't know how much stuff you want to hear about, but there are 6 bullet points. We're partnering with businesses and residences, improving City Hall's proactive economic development efforts, getting more infill development, and upgrading the built environment, improving customer service and permit process. And some of this is the obvious stuff that you want to see the city do. The city's trying to make a better effort to have a friendlier and more customer appreciative experience with businesses that come in, and that has a lot to do with the efforts that they've been making at planning and zoning. And I think that I accidentally observed an interaction with Ann Hirsch the other day and a customer who was dealing with a building permit problem, and the customer obviously was in flagrant violation of the rules, and Ann Hirsch handled it in such a friendly and non-aggressive and non-combative way that it just showed me the best of public service. Yes, we have rules. Yes, these rules are for everybody to follow, that it's necessary for the general public, but it's important for us to recognize you're a human being who's upset because you're having a problem. And I thought it was really well done, and if to the extent that there have been some issues about this and raised, I think that the planning department has already stepped up and started to address this. Really happy to see that. With regard to some of the other points, the idea of fostering local partnerships is an obvious one. The businesses are available for it. We need to be able to use a little bit of city time and a little bit of city resources to help with the large employer groups and to help with convening initial meetings and trainings with the smaller groups. And we can build on things like the more successful things we've had, like the Solano Stroll and the Albany Local Week. We can initiate a marketing plan that targets residents.
You're okay, just keep going.
There are a couple of things that the city's doing on its own and has been drifting in this direction. They allow for the infrastructure issues regarding changing of zoning and allowing for relaxing parking restrictions and to change the building heights. Once again, I would raise my own personal comment about this. This is a major change for the city. I think that it's helpful to the businesses and to the business community, but I think it does require the city to have a community-wide dialogue about this particular, because it will change the way Albany looks and feels depending upon the density we're talking about and depending upon the parking problems that may arise. There's a general agreement that we need to do a more targeted outreach program for businesses, business attraction, business retention, and that may require at some point, and the committee believes that it will require a dedicated person on city staff to do this. All the competing cities that we're dealing with do it, and they do it better than we do. So it's something that we, I think, need to make a commitment toward. The infill business and attraction is partly what will make that work better. When you walk down 4th Street or when you walk down another business community, the walkability has to do with whether you have infill on the site and whether you have a friendly pedestrian experience for your commercial zone. The zoning changes, as long as we have enough hearings about them, I think that will be helpful. there's the idea, one of the ideas that I thought was a good idea was to do a San Pablo Avenue plan with an EIR so that you have that in place so that developments and projects that come forward already have an opportunity to be able to pencil out what it's going to cost them to do it and understand how far they're going to go. The upgrade of the built environment, it's, I think, a good idea to increase the standards. I think that will help us. And I think it's long been an idea of some of us to try to get a BART station at the corner of Marin or Solano and the Masonic. The cost of that may be too high, but I don't think we should give up because the citizens of Albany have been paying for this all along. There always was intended to be an Albany BART stop, and it was the lack of foresight of some of the people on the city council at the time that stopped it. So I think it's worth pursuing. One of the more exciting things that I think we can do has to do with public art. I think we should, there's almost no public art in Albany, and I think we should pursue that. I think it will help our business district and help our community, and the Arts Committee wants to work with us. I've kind of skipped through a lot of parts of this because it's a long document, and I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Thank you.
I think that'll do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions from council?
Yeah, I have a quick one. Why not, if we're going to do a San Pablo plan, why not incorporate Solano Avenue into that?
We could, but I think the advantage to San Pablo is it's got bigger spaces, and it's got more of industrial commitment, more of a large-size commercial commitment. Solano Avenue has fewer location opportunities, and we do address the issue of identifying location opportunities and trying to do some outreach to property owners to see if we can get them engaged in that process. But San Pablo lends itself to it more easily, and maybe if we're going to try things, might be better to try it there first and see how it works.
Yeah, I actually had a question about the San Pablo Avenue area plan and EIR. Oakland has done EIRs in specific areas around the city that essentially set up developers that they can come in and, you know, I don't know if it's all the EIR work that they would normally be required to do, but it's most of it apparently. Is this what you're envisioning along San Pablo, perhaps?
Yeah, that's the drift toward that direction. And if, you know, I'm in favor, I noticed the council talking about this on two different issues tonight. I think it's a good idea for us as a small city to take small steps and see how they're working. It would not be, I mean, we can't do what Oakland does, and I don't think that we should take on that burden.
Okay, well, I think it's a great idea if we can set up some of this stuff for developers and make it easier and less expensive for them. I think that's the way to success.
Another way to put that, while I made the mention about city staff and the planning, and I think that one of the problems that people have had, and I've heard from the business community, is that they come in and they don't get clear goalposts as to where they're going, and so sometimes they feel the goalposts get moved. And the idea of eliminating that ambiguity is a great idea. So if we could have an EIR process that was streamlined and understandable and predictable, you'd be able to attract more business. Businesses don't want to get involved in something that's going to be long, drawn out, and unsure at the end. The one thing I did hear, and I think that this is a wrong direction, I heard in one meeting, one city, not a city attorney, somebody who was hired by the city, a lawyer, say that, well, notwithstanding what the staff says, we want you to know that you cannot rely on it.
I'm sorry, what? Could you say it again?
Notwithstanding what a city staff person tells you, say, for example, in a planning setting, you cannot rely on it. We don't allow you to rely on it. The law is the law, and you're responsible for figuring it out yourself. To me, that's the opposite of the direction we need to be going in, that we need to be able to have staff. If the staff doesn't know enough, it's a question of education. If the staff can't answer a question, then perhaps a manager or somebody above should be able to, but you should be able to tell an applicant for a building permit what's expected, and if you comply with all these requirements, you'll get your building permit. There won't be some new thing thrown at you.
Are there other Questions from council? I think, read in the, I don't know, the East Bay paper, whatever it's called, today about a plan from Oakland to West Contra Costa County, somewhere on San Pablo Avenue, talking about this very thing, having sort of a specific plan for the entire East Bay. Is that something you're aware of? Is that, do you know anything about that?
There have been a number of efforts to do that. In fact, there was almost a JPA to do that whole planning thing. And if that happens, that'd be great. I mean, it'd be a positive thing for Albany if we can be part of it.
Okay, great, thank you.
You know, that kind of relates to what Michael Barnes was talking about with Solano. I think it would be very hard to do something like that for Solano without it being a joint effort with Berkeley because of the stretch that is Albany on one side and Berkeley on the other.
Yeah, and you know, regarding that, we might be able to do it with part of Solano, and we almost did do it back in around, I can't remember the year now, but there was a time when the Albany Theater was for sale, and we got together and put a plan, a few of us got together, not the city council, but, and brought it to the city to get the Berkeley Opera, who was looking for a new location, to locate as the anchor tenant. We could buy the Albany Theater and all the land around it, the parking, for about $625,000. We brought that proposal to the city to do that, and we brought the Berkeley Opera, changed the words of Carmen to a new libretto, and had them sing about how they would love to be the tenant, and they would love to do this. The city council, I think, fell short in their long-range thinking and didn't do it, but we could have done a small theater district down on Lower Solano, and we would have had, I mean, it would have been great, but it didn't happen. But we can do things like that if we are able to come up with a long-term plan.
That was a while back. I'm presuming 625,000 for that.
Not so long ago. It was, I think, when Clinton was in office, so, you know.
Okay.
Let's keep this moving here. Any other council questions? Are there any public comment on this issue? Come on up.
Alan Maris, Albany resident. I don't get here very often, so my comments kind of build up. I'm very much in favor of more public art, and glad to see that in the plan. I think it's going to make our city much more attractive to people coming and using the restaurants and our entertainment facilities and those bulb outs. I'm a little bit concerned about how we're going to deal with this plan when we come against a Safeway type project again. There's so much protest by community members, usually local to the project, community members, and we really have to find some way to deal with it. I think that Safeway project was a good project, and we lost it. And if we're going to have a good economic plan, we have to show some strong leadership, work with the neighbors. I thought we did, but Safeway went away, so just a warning, the plan needs some good, strong leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Bring it back to council for final comments.
Thanks for all the hard work. I think it's looking good, and why didn't we do this before?
Yeah, I can very much support this. You know, just a little bit for the record, that the Safeway project was killed, I think, in part by neighborhood opposition, but there were a lot of other factors in that too, including Safeway not being able to move very quickly on some of the things they said they were going to do.
Let's stay focused.
And the mention of a BART stop, yeah, that is the holy grail, I think, for a lot of us. We would love to see it, but we do have to remember that if we had had a BART stop in 1961 or whenever they were doing the planning for that, it probably would have taken out about 10% of our housing for the parking lot they would have demanded. So now a BART stop, I think, could be done without that kind of damage to the surrounding neighborhoods. my only other, it was sort of a common question that, the space along Solano just lacks sidewalks, in my opinion, and I'm hoping that that's going to be part of the infrastructure needs that we're looking at. When I look at the sidewalk on the block that your office is on, particularly in front of AT&T, it's beyond terrible. It's dangerous, the way the uplift, and that's the case in many places. And we're not going to get a lot of people coming to Solano comfortably if we can't keep our damn sidewalks at least safe. Anyway, my 2 cents.
I think this is terrific. I had a few issues with the plan itself, not the implementation plan, and it looks to me like they've all been addressed. I was concerned about some of the parking configuration discussion and encouraging rotating public art. It looks like that is here, and also more bike-friendly stuff, and that I see that in here as well. And I'm delighted. I think the whole thing is terrific.
Yeah, we're going in the right direction here. Thanks also to the consultants and Nicole and to the chair and the entire committee for this work, and so happy to see this underway. So a few comments, though, that and some of them very important, I think. It was called out in the plan, in the previous to the implementation plan, that we need to have a point person for anyone to go to for economic development. And I think that, and I've talked to Nicole about this, since she's taken on slightly different duties now, we're going to need to, and this doesn't have to be decided tonight, but we need to appoint that person who can be the one person that developers or business or whoever goes to first. And then maybe they go to Shelley if they need, if they want to plan a party, or maybe they go to Jeff's department if they need help with the permits. But having that point person, I think, was a strong recommendation in the original consultant's plan. And I think, as I said, we don't have to solve this now, but we need to have that person. And it could be a staff person, a part-time person. I think we do need to keep in mind that we could hire for this, just like El Cerrito has now hired a part-time economic development person. I think that the city, the chamber, and the Solano Avenue Association are doing a great job of supporting the businesses. I think we know how to do that. What I think we need to do is we need to think bigger, need to think big, need to think bigger, need to think innovative. In this regard, I feel like we've taken either no steps or way too small steps for a long time, and I think we do need to act big. I urge everyone and anyone, and particularly my fellow council members, to study the El Cerrito San Pablo specific plan. I believe a lot of the things that we talked about tonight is exactly what they did. They said, what do we want? Okay, we want this on San Pablo Avenue. It's form-based zoning where they don't even tell what the businesses or who the developers what it has to be. It just has to fit in this form factor. And then with this criteria, if you come in, you got your permit. You can go build. I think we need something like that. I think we need to do as much as possible to remove those barriers, just as we're said, to not just businesses, but to developers. Because I think that's what we need here, is for developers to come in. It's not going to be a business that's going to go and reoccupy Albany Bowl and change it into something wild. It's not going to be a business that goes in and changes that strip mall next to Albany Bowl into something fantastic. It's going to take a developer to come in and say, oh, this is a piece of underutilized land, full lot depth here, Albany Bowl and all the parcels next to it to the north, and say, hey, I can build retail and housing above it here, and really revitalize this area and give us more retail and more housing. I think that's the sort of things we should be looking for, and that's the sort of things we need to allow to happen through our policies. Finally, I'd say that another thing we missed, a small thing that we missed is a parking survey of existing multifamily units to figure out how the parking is working. In fact, one of these days in my spare time, which is a joke, I have none. But maybe over Christmas, or over the holidays, I'll go and peek in the parking garages for all the apartment buildings we have around here and see what the parking is like. I imagine I'm going to see a lot of underutilized space there, and I think that goes to show that the parking policies are a big part of what we're doing here. Okay, I kind of got off track a little bit, but big. Think big. I urge everyone to think big. Thank you.
I would caution you, over the holidays, people go on vacation.
Skewed data.
Or some people do. I would agree with you, though. I think this is great, and I thank the committee and the consultants and obviously Nicole for all the work they've put into this. I do think that getting this San Pablo Avenue specific plan moving forward is really the key piece. And I kind of think of that as the big piece, and then there's all of the sort of obvious things, and I think of them as being simpler, although I know they're not, some of the low-hanging fruit. So they're kind of two parallel paths, but I do hope that we can do something about the specific plan. I think that'll really make a difference to moving forward. Okay, with that, could we get a motion to approve the implementation plan?
So moved.
Second.
Will the council?
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and thank you again. Okay, 10.3, requests for proposals for voter opinion polling services. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, this is in follow-up to your last discussion regarding possible ballot measures for the November 2018 ballot. As you'll recall, on November 6th, we had a high-level discussion of what might be on that ballot, and two of those items were revenue measures for existing city services. One is a half-cent sales tax that is currently in existence. The other is how to transition the current Measure R into a new type of funding mechanism, given that Measure R will be expiring. In follow-up to what I heard the council discuss at that last meeting, one of the general interests conveyed was conducting some sort of voter opinion poll. And in terms of timing, we have time on our side right now. We did this process in 2012, and we're actually at about the exact same time frame that we were in that year in terms of requesting proposals and contracting for services and actually conducting that voter opinion poll. So attached to your staff report, you will find the draft request for proposals. This would be issued, and we would receive responses back. Staff would then return to the council with a recommendation on the most competitive service provider to conduct the voter opinion poll. In 2012, the cost was about $22,000. I'm assuming that's gone up a bit. It's probably somewhere between 25 and 30, and it may depend on the overall length of our survey. So there will be a little bit of back and forth that we'll need to bring to the council as we fine-tune this contract. But at this point in time, it's simply a request to allow the issuance of the request for proposals. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Nope. One's coming.
Okay, no, I'll do a comment.
Are there any public comments? Seeing none. Oh, seeing Mr. Maris. Alan, maybe you could come more often.
You're right. I have to take a long nap in the afternoon to survive one of these, though. Speaking of surveys, we're going to be looking at affordable housing issues in Albany in the near future, and I would hope we would look at public support for funding affordable housing projects in Albany. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, are there comments from council? Rochelle?
Yeah, my only concern about this is with regard to Measure R, The sales tax is just something essentially that we would be asking, hey, let's do this again. Are people okay with continuing it? Measure R can't work that way. Measure R has issues. We need to be sure what we're doing with the existing Measure R and think about what, along the same lines, would be appropriate for a new Measure R. And I think that we might be putting the cart before the horse, asking people, would they be willing to vote for renewing Measure R when we don't have any substance? We can't really say, well, this is to buy land on Albany Hill. That we have to have a rationale for it that meets the modern circumstances. So I would be inclined to hold off and maybe do some very intensive work in the short run on what a new Measure R would look like, and then do this.
As part of this process, I'm welcome to whatever the council directs, but as part of this process, we have a kickoff meeting and a follow-up meeting with the primary staff, and that's what we did in 2012. So that would include Mark Hurley, our Public Works Director, and he really has looked at his future funding requirements in terms of demands with parks and new parks, urban forestry, and other open space, including creeks. So I think that we do have some of that data. I think he has his needs identified, and he is also working with a financial consultant to identify what level of funding is sufficient going forward and how that can be calculated to make sure that it's a reasonable request. So we have parallel tracks, more or less, in terms of numerics that may help inform the council's decision, as well as this voter opinion poll, which would help answer questions like, do you support funding for parks? What are your highest priority concerns in the city? And I'm happy to provide the example from 2012. It started out with a lot of the safety questions, and that was more for general services, whereas this one would, yes, be more focused towards actual operations and maintenance costs for our Public Works Department and implementing their charge of maintaining open space and parks.
Yeah, and that's so different from, the way that Measure R was put together and, how it was promoted as a campaign matter. It was the measure to buy the land for the Albany Hill Park. It was not operations and maintenance. And, I just think it's, personally, as a council member, I'd want to have an idea what the staff is thinking of before going to polling. I'd want to be sure that we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. We all think that this is something that the council would be interested in putting on the ballot before we're asking people if they would vote for it, unless you're thinking in terms of very preliminary, questions like, do you like parks? I don't think that, I think you need to be a bit more specific. So that would be my concern.
Is it possible to do the RFP, and I see the response is due January 8th, but that doesn't mean they're going to start polling on January 9th. We could start the polling much later, correct?
Right, yeah, so the firm will work with us to develop the questions, the actual survey, and that includes working with staff. And at least in 2012, the firm that we utilized then had a high level of expertise in assisting staff focus, learn about overall needs and concerns for funding, and help focus those questions into very tangible questions that generated solid results in terms of response level and support level. So I am confident that we can find a consulting service that can certainly guide us through that process. But I definitely understand the need for us to know what we are looking to fund. And I think that we can do that on a parallel track, with that happening a little bit before we actually implement this actual work. If we can at least put out the request for proposals now, we can begin that selection and review process, but not necessarily launch the survey until we have a little bit more fine tuning and perhaps some discussion back and forth with the council on what we're looking to fund in an overall sense.
Yeah, it seems like more than fine tuning to me. It seems like, the basic concept of a new Measure R still needs to be pulled together.
Sure, and we did have some of that at the last meeting, and I'd be happy to have Mark back to talk more about his overall funding needs going forward.
Question? Maybe Craig can help us out. For the November 2018 ballot, we have to file our initiative in July, is that correct?
Typically, a deadline, first half of July, I believe, to place things on the ballot.
Okay, so in the RFP or the description, it says we want them to complete their work in 60 days, so that's 2 months. So let's say July takes us a month to generate the results and turn it into initiative. That's June. 2 months before that is April. We don't have a ton of time. That's my concern is that we're okay, but we need to sort of jump on this, I think, after the holidays.
Those pesky holidays.
I guess the way I'm understanding that is that there's no possibility of doing this in time for anything in June. Be there.
In terms of the deadlines, I'd need to check with the Registrar of Voters Office, but I don't know how informed the ballot measure would be if you're going to prepare something to replace Measure R in June. That would be very rushed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And plus, we'd have to pay for a special election probably in Albany, right?
Nick, did you have any comments?
Is it comments or questions now?
I think it's comments.
We're on comments, but now we all have questions.
It's like Jeopardy. You have to change your comments into questions.
So regarding the last thing that was said about, I lost my train of thought.
June and November?
Yeah, June and November. Sorry, Craig, what was the last thing you were saying?
Well, the first thing was the deadline for making a decision to place an item on the ballot falls in July. If you were looking at the June election date, that would be, we're not sure exactly when that is, but it'd be.
Oh, special election, that was
very early.
The quote was very ambitious.
Got it. Would that be a special election? We'll have an election here, but if we want to put something on the ballot, would that then require us to pay more to the county? Okay.
We have our November 2018 ballot, and it's assumed that there will be ballot measures on that ballot, so we would be obligated to have all the offices on that ballot. Any additional elections that we participate in terms of placing ballot measures on the ballot is a special election.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just recalling that the school district did this, but they did pay for the special election, I believe. Yeah, okay, got it. I'm refreshing my memory. Okay.
There are also some restrictions in Prop 218 on placement of tax measures on ballots where there are no council members up for re-election. You essentially have to declare a fiscal emergency to do that. That's another complication if you're looking at June.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say we proceed with haste, but not with so much haste that that we don't define exactly what we want to ask, and we don't know what issues we're talking about. I don't think I had any more cogent comments. All right, that's it.
Well, yeah, it seems to me that we need to move on the RFP. And as you said, a parallel track that we're really fleshing out exactly what we want on the ballot, so we have a little better handle on it. And I think you're right. It's not fine tuning it; it's figuring it out.
Yeah. And the needs, the Public Works Department's needs are an important aspect, but you can't go to the electorate and say, we're still figuring out how to spend our Measure R funds, and we want more for the kind of standard stuff that the city does. There has to be some thought about how it all comes together and a case that can be made for something that people will see as a real improvement for the city.
Just as an aside, but following up on Rochelle's comment, we saw some very interesting proposals 4, 5, 6 months ago about trail development on Albany Hill. What's the status of those?
I'd need to research that. Was it part of the proposed improvements, or was it just the trails?
I think it was the improvements.
We have a knowledgeable staff person.
Good evening. The status of that for the Measure R for the CIP projects, we did that community workshop with the Parks and Rec Commission where they decided that to use the Measure R money that was for capital projects on the trail improvements, access and trail improvements, and also there was a bridge that was included in the Albany Hill master plan, Creekside master plan. We went through, did the concept drawings so that we could establish the approximate estimates for how much the project would cost. So our next step for that, I'll be working with the Public Works Department on developing an RFP to get an architect to actually do the design drawings and move into the community process.
So that wouldn't be completed by fall of 2018.
You know, the target for that was September 2019 was when I Measure R. I mean, we're trying to have something moving by then.
Right, okay.
Okay. Are there any other comments? All right, then we could have a motion to authorize the issuance of a request for proposals.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
I'll do one of those symbolic no's. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, the motion carried. Okay, on to new business. 11-1, Fair Play Act, AB 2404, eligibility for field use, participation assessment, and field allocation policy. Do we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor and Council, for giving me a chance to speak to you tonight about the item before you, which is the Fair Play Act, AB 2404, and the eligibility for field use, participation assessment, and field allocation policy. The Fair Play Act in community sports is a California law that prohibits gender discrimination in community youth sports programs. The law was passed in 2004 and went into effect in 2005. The Fair Play Act requires that girls be provided opportunities for participation in community sports programs that are equal both in quality and scope to those provided to boys, including youth sports programs that are run by recreation departments and third-party programs that use city facilities. Opportunities for use of city facilities considered in the aggregate should be provided in numbers substantially proportionate to the respective numbers of girls and boys in the community. City of Albany, according to the U.S. Census, is made up of about 52.4 boys and 47.6 girls. These are important numbers when we talk about AB 2404. One thing to point out is that the law became more stringent in its requirements in 2015. Basically, when the law was passed, they gave about 10 years for recreation and community services or recreation departments to at least demonstrate that they're moving towards compliance, and that ended in 2015. And so you can see that we're already extremely behind in working through compliance for AB 2404. In February 2016, the Recreation and Community Services Department attended a training with other local cities in the town of Marinda. And when we came back from that training, what we took from that is that we needed to first decide and figure out what our numbers were. Albany Recreation and Community Service Department is unique in that we don't offer or had not offered we don't offer in-house sports leagues that you would see in other recreation departments where they run a youth basketball league or a t-ball league that are run by the cities. All of our numbers are made up by third-party organizations such as youth baseball or youth softball or youth soccer and the Albany Unified School District. People use our facilities. And so our first step was really to look at and do our first assessment of what our numbers were. We weren't We did not include participation numbers by gender on our applications at the time, and so we did a lot of phone calling in that first year of assessment, which was fall 2015 to 2016. We also decided and knew that it was important to start doing the education side of this, that people needed to know about it. If I went to this training and I didn't know about it, then of course people in the community probably didn't know about it as well. It doesn't mean it's any less important, for sure. After our first season of collection, and this is for the whole season, so this isn't one sport versus a different sport. This is for all girls and boys. We had 1,391 participants in third-party groups, and 89.6 of those were boys, and 10.4% were girls. And so getting this first round of numbers, you can obviously tell, was alarming, especially to our Recreation Community Service Department, which is focused on it being inclusive and providing youth sports to all members of the community. And so we took that as a marching orders that we needed to take action quickly. We definitely started to work on, we added participation numbers as a data collection on our field rental applications. We made sure that all ex-field users and new field users in the community were invited to request field use. We encouraged leagues that are co-ed or have girls' teams on them to schedule more of their girls' programs on our fields. We sent out a youth sports and survey, which is really to gauge what do the girls want to play, what are they interested in, what are obstacles that are keeping them from participating in youth sports, and really collect that data so that we're offering youth sports that are meaningful to them, that they could play in high school or they could get a scholarship to play in college. And in doing that, we looked at our own department. We had not run our own leagues. We'd not equipped for that. We don't usually hire coaches, but my staff did a great job in establishing our first girls volleyball league that's played inside of a gym, and that was very successful. After the second year of numbers, our numbers were definitely better. We were at 69% boys and 31% girls. This is after just making a few adjustments and being more aware of the issue that was out there and where we were in terms of our numbers. This report was given to the Parks and Rec Commission in February 2017, and Parks and Rec Commission has also added it to their work plan to receive annual participation reports for AB 2404. Then in March, we began working. I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Donna Lopiato. She is the guru of gender equity. She is known internationally, the Olympic Committee, the NCAA. She works for the U.S. Office of Civil Rights. She's testified in congressional hearings. And she was really interested because there was a chance to develop a model policy that not only we could use, but other cities could use. Implementing AB 2404 can be confusing, and there's not much to go on. And so I really appreciated her efforts in developing a policy, the one that is before you, that takes steps to ensure the compliance with the law, which is really important for us as a department to make sure that we're complying with the law as a city. It includes self-assessments, monitoring, distribution of a gender equity policy, which we had not been doing, designating a compliance coordinator. Someone's going to bring the information together and report it back out, and then puts a lot of requirements on the department to make sure that we're collecting the numbers, doing reports, making people aware of our status and where we are in compliance, which is really important. And in addition to the youth surveys. Now, a number of these things we already started doing, but this really formalizes that process for us. The policy also includes, which I think is really an interesting part, that the third-party data collection, there's a form, and it has some detailed questions asking those organizations what they're doing to promote girls in their organizations. And I think that's a really important piece, that awareness and thinking about promoting girls in youth sports is very important. And it also asks, how can the Recreation Department assist them in promoting girls in athletics as well? So, you know, as the director of the department, it's my responsibility to make sure that we're complying with this law. It is also equally as important that as a director, we're providing youth sports, quality youth sports for everyone in our community. And I think that this policy will help give us guidance on making sure that we're doing that. There's questions?
Are there any questions of council, from council?
Well, I probably have a ton of questions here, probably far more, but I find this totally interesting, and I thank you for putting this all together. It was obviously a lot of work, But let me run down my questions so it's a little bit clearer to what's going on, at least for me. AB 2404 is enforced by lawsuits. There's no state agency that comes down. It essentially sets up a situation that if we're not in compliance, we could be sued by somebody else. But as I understand it, there haven't been any suits since 2015 or even from the beginning of this in other cities?
No, usually they're surrounded by Title IX lawsuits. Same situation. Title IX, though, deals more with high school age and college, and that's usually where most of the lawsuits have come from, yes.
Okay. One thing that I found a little strange, in fall 15 and spring and summer of 2016, there were 1,391 kids that used facilities. This is in the staff report. Mm-hmm. And then the following year during the same time period, there were 1,360 kids, 31 less. Now, I don't know if there's just normally a difference in year to year, it goes up and it goes down, but in that, at least that one short time period, there were fewer kids using it, although the ratio between boys and girls was better. Mm-hmm. I guess, one of my concerns from all this is, could we be setting up a situation where in order to make the ratios good, the field usage will go down? Could that be a secondary effect of this?
When you say field usage, you mean, and to address
the number of kids using the fields.
No, these numbers come directly from the third-party organizations, the numbers that they tell us.
Okay.
So if they're not reporting their numbers accurately, we're not the police in terms of counting every single kid, but those numbers come directly from the third-party organizations.
Okay, but...
what they write on a form.
Right, but I'm not sure I'm quite putting out the question correctly, but is there a danger that in the interest of keep getting the relationship between boys and girls more equal, that we could somehow be causing, less kids would be using the fields? In other words, if the situation a while back was between softball and Little League, and we tried, and I guess your department tried to get more girl representation, so they made the fields more available to girls through softball, but and I don't think that was a bad thing, but could we somehow end up with less field usage if there was, less girls available for field to use? Then we would, in order to make the numbers look good, less boys could use it too.
Here's a hypothetical, and I'm not suggesting I think this is reality. This is what an attorney would call a hypothetical. Let's say there's enough demand for girls' sports that your field utilization, he said late at night, would only be 33%. Would you therefore then be constrained only to let the boys have the fields for 33% of the time, then 33% of the time the fields would be empty?
It's not just fields. So this is all city facilities. And so when we run a girls' volleyball league, they're in a gym. And so that doesn't count against a field use. That doesn't change that use, right? So if, an example to yours, in the fall, just this past fall, we didn't have an organization that was like a girls' softball league request field use in the fall. We had about 5 baseball organizations request use. Did they get the use that they requested? Yes, they did. We didn't have a competing use. Actually, we had baseball organizations competing for the same field space, and we had to do the same thing we usually do, which discuss and negotiate that. So no, the goal is to make sure that we're providing the adequate resources. We're checking these boxes to make sure that we're providing the same things for girls as we are for boys. The numbers are tilted more in boys in terms of providing that. And our goal is to find a way to provide girls with opportunities. Every girl's not going to want to play Little League baseball. That's not going to change, but we might be able to offer a lacrosse program, a tennis team, a girls volleyball team that would help improve those numbers for girls sports.
So it's using multiple facilities will help in making this
Yes.
even out more.
So, and with facilities, those city facilities count. Anybody using city facilities count. Even when the school district uses our facility, that counts. So it's using city resources. So if we run like a city-run league and we use a school district facility, those numbers count towards our participation because it's a city-run using city resources.
Okay, I have. Thank you for doing your hypothetical, because I think that got a little bit closer to what I was trying to say, or a little more clearly. But another kind of hypothetical. It seems to me there's a bias, as there probably should be, for Albany Fields being for Albany kids. And there's, at one point, there's in the regulations, there's a criteria that first rec department gets to use them, and then schools, and it goes down the line. Could there be a situation also set up where, because some out-of-city organization had more girls involved, they would get some kind of preference over an organization that had more boys, for field use? I mean, it's very hypothetical, but I mean, is that a danger?
The classification for use that you're referring to in the policy comes directly from the master fee schedule. That didn't really change. That tells a priority kind of pecking order who gets first choice. So technically, based on the master fee schedule, that's Exhibit A in master fee schedule, we could say we're going to start running a youth softball program or a something else program, and we would have first opportunity to run our programs on those fields. So and secondly is the school district. So it sets up that priorities. We don't have a formal policy that says that only residents get a higher use. We do try to look towards that, and we've encouraged organizations such as a youth soccer organization that's made up of teams from all over the East Bay to schedule more of their Albany teams on our fields, because that's important. I think as a kid, I played on my local field. I could walk to my practice, and a lot of times you don't get that. You're playing in Richmond, and you have Richmond people playing on our fields, and so we try to encourage people to schedule their Albany teams. Again, this is about the city's numbers, and we're encouraging girls in our community to have more participation, to have more opportunities so that they can reap the benefits of participating in youth sports. Okay. It's not a baseball versus a softball. It's the entire look at what we're offering. And so when you look at the number of, if you want to look at baseball versus softball, though, the number of hours and kids and percentages of baseball used in our field is so far more than the few girls we let play softball. So just for example of the one you're referring to, you're talking about over 1,000 hours of field time for a baseball organization, and we offered 42 hours for a softball organization. So to me, I don't think that that is an unreasonable amount of time. Okay. And Ocean View is a unique field because when we talk about resources, it has lights. And so if we only offer that resource or that to a boys organization and not offer that to a girls side, then we're not in compliance. They should have an opportunity to have a practice at night, especially when it gets darker early, so that they can have longer practices as well. And that's an important distinction. Ocean View is a very special field in that it has lights.
What about the lights at the high school track and football and soccer field?
Yeah, it's not our facility, so it's not something we control.
So it's not something that I've jogged around the track at night. It's nice, and I'm always disappointed when they turn off the lights, right through that, in the middle of that quarter-mile interval. Yeah. But so do we have the ability to rent it or lease it? I've seen it. I know it's rented out in summer during the days.
Yeah. We now lights have special restrictions for that field with the neighborhood associations.
So I remember.
So many days they can use it. For our use of school district facilities, we have a joint use agreement, and so they had the same kind of classification for use. It's school district activities first, then city's use, and so they schedule all of their programs, and then if there's something left over, then we can schedule the facility. So that's what's happened with the volleyball program. But getting a gym space during a basketball season or a wrestling season is pretty hard. They're limited in gym space, and we don't have a gym, which is another drawback for us, that we don't have something that we schedule our own. programs in.
So we flip the hypotheticals around and ask the real world question, what's the hardest thing about, for you, implementing this policy based on the law?
It's the fact that we don't have enough field space and we don't have a gym.
Right.
I mean, you can't get around it. But that doesn't mean that if you don't, the problem with thinking that, oh, the boys' organization has more kids. Well, the girls' organization could grow as well if we provide them with an opportunity to use space. If you're limited to a field or two here or there and no lights, then you have to develop an organization that fits that, right? And so we need to make sure that we're thinking about that and we're aware, and we're really trying to figure out what it is that girls want to be doing in our city, and what those obstacles are. And if we can, like I said, it's not going to be, we're going to find a field sport that's going to compete with other in-season sports for field space, but we may be able to find other sports for girls that we can offer. And that's my responsibility to make sure we're doing that.
What about the Gilman fields? I know they're not our fields, but since we're part of the JPA, do we get a quarter point for that or anything?
No, unfortunately.
Okay, and then my other question is, we're talking about boys and girls.
Yeah.
But are there any other equity issues that we need to be thinking of, whether it's other gender equities, if it's race equities, if it's whatever it is?
You know, in the policy, in the general statement, it does call out that we're not going to discriminate against sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, all the basic ones that we should be making sure we don't discriminate against. So your question is, you know, it's kind of that's a big can of worms in terms of gender identity in that sense. We can add that information to our application to collect the data, but that data comes from third-party organizations mainly, and so they need to be adding that to their when you sign up to play in a girls softball league, so that we're getting the information. Mm-hmm.
I guess I just still want goalposts to change, as we said before, and all of a sudden we're behind again because we haven't collected data.
Yeah, our department, one of our core values is to be inclusive. We're hyper aware, and I think we do. And for all of our programs, we want people to feel welcome, and no matter boy, girl, gender non-conforming, we're welcome to and open to all of them.
Right, and we know that. Other questions? I have a feeling there's some public comment. So have you turned in speaker cards?
Yes.
Great. Can you read them?
So I'll read the first three, and then if you have cards, please turn them in to me as you come up. Alyssa So, Sammy So, Tegan Knowles, Kendra Knowles.
I want to thank you all for hanging in with us for so long tonight, especially you younger people. We really appreciate it.
But just FYI, you can watch us at home on KALB, and when your item comes up on the agenda, then you can drive down here.
Or bike or walk.
In your jammies.
They may not be parking.
In your jammies, you can come.
It will if you
My name is Tegan, and I'm 10 years old and in 5th grade at Oceanview Elementary School. I play on the East Bay Oaks girls baseball team. The Oaks are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to support and promote girls baseball in Albany and the greater East Bay area. Right now, we have 40 girls that participate on the Oaks, and the team is growing every day. I love playing baseball, and the Oaks give me the opportunity to play with other girls that love baseball as much as I do. I enjoy playing baseball with boys. I do have three older brothers who play as well, but it's very special to be able to play with a group of girls that are in love with America's pastime. Our team appreciates the opportunity to apply for time at Oceanview Field and other city fields so that our team can continue to grow and support the dreams of girls that want to play baseball. Thank you for letting me address the City Council. I appreciate your time and patience.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I am in 4th grade at Morgan Elementary. To my teammates, I am known as Chaos. Coach Pat gave me this nickname because I'm so fast at running the bases that I create confusion and chaos for the visiting team. When I'm not running the bases, my favorite position is catcher. At first, I played baseball for Albany Little League, but now I play for the East Bay Oaks too. Being an Oak means I get to play baseball with other girls. My teammates come from all over to play in Albany. Lainey comes from Sacramento. Hannah and Zora come from Alameda. Last year, the Oaks won second place at the 2017 Baseball for All National Tournament in Rockford, Illinois. We hope to win first place in 2018. The Oaks are an awesome team. I love being an Oak because I get to meet new girls who like to play baseball. There are so many new girls who came to fall ball, I still don't know all their names. I'm also challenged to get stronger and healthier. I feel so lucky I got to meet Coach Lillian, who played on the USA Women's Baseball team. She's a great mentor to all the girls. Mostly, though, being on an Oak helps me to believe I can do anything boys can do and have fun at the same time. Thank you for letting me address the council, and I appreciate your time and patience.
Thank you.
Next. I have Sammy and Kendra and Alan.
Thank you, council members. My name is Sammy Seo. Thank you for allowing me the time to provide input on resolution number 2017-85 as an Albany resident, taxpayer, and parent of a 9-year-old girl. I am very excited that the City of Albany's Recreation Department is implementing a policy that will promote equal participation by girls and boys on city fields. That is incredibly exciting for me. I especially appreciate the provision that gives higher facility allocation priority to programs for the underrepresented gender, as well as fee discounts to third-party programs demonstrating consistent growth and efforts to increase the participation of the underrepresented gender. So thank you very much for this policy. I do have just a few questions and comments regarding the policy and the Recreation Department's support of girls' sports activities on city facilities. First of all, how will the department measure consistent growth and efforts to increase participation? I would, for one, like to see the policy incorporate percentage growth as well as raw total numbers. Sports that are newer may not have the total numbers of more established sports and may take some time to increase those numbers. But as we are seeing across the country in various sports, there is tremendous demand and growth opportunities in newer sports, such as girls' baseball. Another question I have is, what is the appeals process for the complaint procedure? Is the City Recreation and Community Services Director the final say in any complaints regarding gender equity in youth sports programs and activities, or is there an appeals process to the Commission and/or City Council? And then finally, I would love to see what kind of support the city's recreation department can provide to support the growth and development of girls' sports. As an example, the San Francisco Bay Sox girls baseball team has partnered very successfully with the San Francisco Parks and Recreation Department to support participation of girls in the SF Youth Baseball League, as well as the SF Bay Sox girls baseball team. SF Parks and Recreation provides financial support by subsidizing registration fees for the Bay Sox as well as SF Youth Baseball, as well as through providing financial support through paid coaches of the girls' teams. This support has led to significant increases in the participation of girls in SF Youth Baseball as well as the SF Bay Sox. Thank you for your time, and I'm out of time.
Thank you.
I think we need a resolution because of the time to extend, yeah.
So moved.
for at least another half hour.
Second.
Okay. We're gonna do by
We moved and seconded already.
Okay, so we're doing by acclamation, we're all in?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fine, go ahead, thank you.
Sure. My name is Kendra Knowles. I am an Albany resident. I have 4 children who have participated and are currently participating in our local youth sports. So the council is being asked to adopt this resolution 2017-85, which would set in place a comprehensive policy called eligibility for field use. And this policy purports to attempt to bring the city in compliance with AB 2404. Now, the objective of 2404 and the proposed city policy is to ensure that boys and girls have equal opportunities to participate in community youth sports programs that are either directly run by public entity or somehow enabled by a public entity. And this objective is great. It's fair, it's just, and a parent of 3 boys and my daughter Tegan here, I'm all for it. However, after reading the report that was prepared and with the policy itself, there are some things that have caused concern. First, I noted that the policy, which does have a profound and significant impact on the sports in our community, there wasn't any public input, not from any of the 3, at least local sport groups that are known, ABGSL, ABSC, ALL. And we checked the agendas, and doesn't seem any of the commissions, the relevant commissions, had been brought into talks with this. And so it shows that there's a collaborative effort that needs to happen when such policies are going to be put in place. There was an outside consultant brought in, but does she really know our community? Does she know our needs? She doesn't appear to live here. She actually resides in Connecticut, from what we can tell. So she doesn't really know the challenges of our youth sports organizations. And I think that's what's the heart of the problem of this policy. It's been created in a vacuum. Those of us who do volunteer, our hours to organize time and field space, we work hard to do that and make sure that every kid has a place to play, no matter gender, no matter orientation. They have a fair time across the board. And whether the field is run by the city or the district is not material to us. We're just looking for a place for our kids to play and to practice.
Thank you. Ellen? Oh, okay. Frank Knowles, Jeff Shipley, and David Price.
Hi, thanks for giving me this chance to address you. My name is Frank Knowles. I'm a resident here in Albany. Tegan's my daughter, Kendra's my wife. I'm also the field scheduler for Albany Little League, so I have a very intimate understanding of the condition, the issues involving field use here in the area. The initial attempts of the director, of the RCS director here to implement this policy before it was actually official policy this past year actually has only exacerbated the problem of field availability and equitable use, and it hasn't made it better. Her actions did nothing to provide equal opportunity for girls and boys when measured by the actual practice time per actual unique child. Measured by that metric, a select group of kids got up to 4 times more practice time than most kids using city facilities. That's hardly an equal opportunity. Part of the problem with this policy is the accounting. Section 1.0, paragraph 2 mentions that opportunities, quote, opportunities for use of city facilities considered in the aggregate should be provided in numbers substantially proportionate to the respective numbers of girls and boys in the community. However, this aggregate is never really defined. Further along in section 1.0, it seems that the actual number of girls and boys using city facilities like Ocean View will be counted in the aggregate, whatever that means. However, the actual implementation of this policy this past spring was to assign equal field time to the various organizations with no regard to actual numbers of kids actually on the field. The method of accounting really needs to be resolved and ironed out and clearly explained. Another major problem with this policy is that it places too much power in the hands of one individual, and that would be the RCS director. Section 1.04 states that the RCS director will serve as the fair play Fair Play Act Compliance Coordinator. The coordinator is responsible for ensuring compliance with the policy and reporting back to the city. Section 6.0 says any complaint regarding gender equity in youth sports programs and activities should be reported to the City Recreation and Community Services Director, who will review the complaint, conduct further investigation as needed, and appropriate action to ensure compliance with the Fair Play Act and applicable city policies. In effect, the director is the police, the judge, the jury, and for lack of a better word, the executioner over the whole process. And as the coordinator, is the one who reports all of this back to the city council and how it's going. This is absolutely terrible policy. Not only does the director have all the power, there is no avenue of appeal or arbitration and no actual accountability of the director's actions since it is the director who reports back to the council. The potential for abuse is simply too great. There are other problems that I'd love to point out to you, but my time is done. I really ask you to clearly and spend some time to really read this policy as it is written and understand the problems that are with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Shipley. I'm an Albany resident, homeowner since 1984. I had a daughter who went throughout ABGSL and played in the high school team. My son went all the way through ALL and played on the high school team as well. I coach with both sports, so I'm sympathetic to both sides. I was also involved in, 2008 or whenever, when the joint use with the school district was implemented. I worked to help Marla Stevenson try to craft something that worked at the high school level that made it fair between the softball team and the baseball team. And it's a hard nut to crack. I mean, we ended up with two softball fields at at Cougar, one baseball field at Memorial, and one baseball field at Ocean View, which theoretically made it even. I don't know that's true, but the problem is looking at this from city facilities versus school district facilities versus neighboring city facilities. The Fair Play Community Sports Act says that we can factor in joint use with school districts. It also says you can partner with adjacent cities. ABGSL uses two fields in Albany, both school district fields. The reason why you can quote a stat that says there are 42 hours for girls and 1,000 hours for boys is because the girls play softball in Berkeley. It's not that they're not getting to play, and there might not be as many hours. I mean, ABGSL is not as large an organization as ALL, but I think those statistics are just grossly misstated. So I challenge, I don't know what the answer is. I do know that the only answer is going to come from taking all the regional fields and trying to allocate them throughout all the cities. I mean, Berkeley and Albany, at least as far as baseball and softball are joined at the hip. I mean, Albany Little League, it's Albany Berkeley Little League, and it's Albany Berkeley Girls Softball League. And to try to come up with stats that ignore one city or the other is just disingenuous.
Thank you. David Priest.
Hi, my name's Dave Preuss. I am Executive VP of Albany Little League and also President of the East Bay Oaks. You heard a couple of Oaks speak earlier. The Oaks grew out of Albany Little League in our attempt to increase the number of girls playing baseball. And we've been successful at that, as you've heard. So that's what we're trying to do. In this overall policy thing, it's a little kind of weird because you guys may remember that Albany High School baseball used to play on Cougar and the softball used to play on Memorial. And we changed that as a city and a school district in order to try to make both fields better for both sports. The irony is now, had we stayed as high school and in our case, Junior Little League Baseball stayed at Cougar, we wouldn't have this disparity in the fields. So as Jeff was talking about, have a little uphill battle. The actual implementation of it last year was the net reduction in hours at Ocean View for Albany Little League. When Shelley tried to make an attempt to get ABGSL to take up some time, and they picked up some of the time, but not all of that time. So the concern I have is that we are developing girls baseball. Right now, most of those girls are younger, 10, 11 years old, 8 to 10, 8 to 11. The fields we use, city fields we use, Ocean View is primarily for our 11, 12, 13-year-old kids, and Memorial is for our high school kids. If we lose the chance to have fields at Ocean View, when our girls get there, then the whole program will be curtailed and they won't have that opportunity to play. So that's kind of an ironic side. And the same thing at high school. So we are all for equal participation on girls. In fact, that's why we started the Oaks. Our concern is that the way it was implemented last year, and our fear in the future is that what that means is there's less time for Little League in general, and that may in the long run mean less time for girls playing Little League too. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've got a very stimulating program for tonight. Can't sit down. First of all, it appears this is not the second reading. It's just the first reading. Have we seen this before? It's just the first reading.
This is not an ordinance, so there's no first and second reading. It's just a proposed resolution, so if the council approves it, it would take effect after tonight.
So it's not getting the public hearing that something important would normally get.
I think this agenda item is our opportunity for public discussion, and it's a policy that the council would adopt at their level.
Thank you. So I've been really excited with what Title IX has done for sports in our community. The girls, I think, have pretty close met the needs of Title IX at the school district. Last time I saw it was maybe 45, 55%. And I think that should be included in our numbers as well. Those are our kids. Well, I think they should be. Okay, you can shake your head and they're not supposed to be. We're talking about the kids in our community, and there are two groups that support our kids, the school district and I think we should look at how we can combine that better. I'm really concerned to see that 300 boys have been dropped from participation so that another 300 girls can participate. I think that's eventually going to have to happen, but it's a pretty big shock on our community to make that big a change so quickly. People need to be prepared. So those are my comments. I think this needs a lot more work. As I said, I think there should be a second or third reading as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jack Miller. I'm the president of Albany Little League. And I've reviewed this policy in detail. I think it's in service of a really laudable goal that all of us support. And Albany Little League, as Dave pointed out, and as Frank pointed out, we've been walking our talk and trying to get more girls involved. I think my issue with this policy is that it is extraordinarily detailed and extraordinarily narrow. It deals, it's aimed at one ordinance in one part of one community. It ignores the fact that there are multiple sports leagues playing in multiple contiguous communities, Albany, Richmond, Kensington, El Cerrito, Oakland, Berkeley, just to name a few, with overlapping constituencies, sharing fields, sharing coaches, sharing field time. Yet this policy is aimed only at a small number of city-controlled fields in Albany. And I think that it really calls for, and as some of the other speakers, or one of the other speakers pointed out, and some of your questions have addressed, it's a very, not just it's narrow, but it was formulated without sufficient community input, and in fact, with extensive input from somebody who is not a part of this community, somebody who's very experienced in this area, but not experienced in Albany, and not well-versed in issues in an area such as the East Bay, where you have multiple cities, multiple entities right next to one another, with children attending or playing in each other's sports leagues, attending each other's schools. There is extensive overlap. And it's just difficult for me to, as somebody involved in youth sports, to understand how a policy which is going to have a major impact on field use in Albany is formulated in such a way as to really ignore the outside world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? We'll bring it back to council for comments.
Well, the obvious question is, what does the law constrain us to do and look at? This is always a problem in the East Bay, especially for a small town like Albany, whereas you can combine services with other cities on any number of issues. But if the state law says we have to confine our analysis to just what is available in Albany, and we're not allowed to sort of shift and trade at a regional level, and if that's what the law says, that's what we have to do. So how's that sit?
That's correct. It's the state law. The policy is just supporting and giving us guidelines for how we can be in compliance. So the policy is telling us the things we need to do to be in compliance. City of Berkeley should have the same policy. El Cerrito, all the surrounding cities, this is a state law. Everybody should be working to be in compliance. And I can tell you that other cities have avoided it just for the same issues. When you have a Little League organization that uses all of the field space and then suddenly they have to give up some of it, that causes issues. People don't want that to happen. But that doesn't mean that that's right also. So this policy, written by an expert in Title IX, because it's very similar to Title IX, whether she lives here or not. But I also provided in the packet the compliance toolkit, which was put together by the Legal Aid Society, Kim Turner, who was the attorney who did the workshop training for the Parks and Rec Commission. All field users were invited to that training, and we provided that packet of information. Details the same information about how you can be in compliance based on what the text is from AB 2404, the actual law.
There's nothing really explicit in AB 204 that talks about how different cities or jurisdictions can trade off.
No, but we could, if we teamed up, if the city offered an Albany-Berkeley baseball organization, we could definitely work together with other cities to provide opportunities for girls and boys. It's a matter of using city resources. And so when you talk about one of those big organizations like the soccer organization that have kids from Berkeley and Albany and a huge number of them, what we've done is we've said, provide us the participation numbers for the actual kids using our field, not the entire number of your organization. So you might have 1,500 kids in soccer. We've said, who are the kids that you're going to be scheduling on our fields using city resources? Tell us that's your participation numbers. So it's not taking people from all over the place and putting that into our totals.
Yeah, so there's an issue, and this comes up a lot, like the distinction between gross domestic product and gross national product is, sort of where you count stuff on which side of what border. So it's kind of the same issue here, so that we're not counting bodies who happen to live in Albany. We're counting bodies from wherever who happen to be using fields in Albany. Is that correct?
Yes.
City
so
fields.
Albany Berkeley Soccer Association, they're scheduling teams. They might have a girls travel team playing on our field. Some might be from Albany, some might be from Berkeley. That's just the nature of where we live. You know, I would love it if we just had teams of all Albany kids, but we don't have enough participants in those groups to just formulate just teams of all Albany kids.
Shelley, what would happen to the numbers if you looked at Berkeley Albany soccer, for example, as one entity, regardless of where they were playing? What would that do to the numbers? Do you have any idea?
Well, it would. They're a huge organization, so we'd have people from kids from all over, and it's not. Then you'd have numbers of kids that weren't using our resource, being counted in our numbers about who's using city resources. So some team that plays in Berkeley all the time and never steps foot in Albany would then be part of our participation numbers. I haven't seen what the breakdown of the boys versus girls in that organization is. But it could be kind of a typical split for most organizations. Obviously, the Little League organization is tilted heavily towards boys. The Oaks organization, we welcome them to apply for field use. They asked for field use, but very late they missed a deadline, and so there wasn't anything available. That's a normal situation, but that's exactly what we're looking for. Those kids that came up and talked about how great it was to play in an all-girls organization and play baseball is so unique, and the stories that they told are exactly what we're trying to impress upon this. It's like, how can we find opportunities for girls to play on an all-girls team and succeed and make friendships and eventually go off to play? I mean, I had to play on the Little League team. I was the only girl. That's how it was at that time. So that's an awesome organization, and we would love to have them playing on our fields.
A couple of questions. So Title IX is schools, and AB 2404 is a very similar thing for cities.
Yes.
Right, and legally, AB 2404 applies to the city fields and only the city fields.
Or city-run leagues. And it has to be a league, so it can't just be like camps or classes or programs. It has to be an established league with competitive schedule.
Okay, leagues playing on city fields then.
And ones that we might operate in-house.
In space, not just fields.
Right.
Gyms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Meaning we're accepting registrations for our girls volleyball league in the summer, run by the city. We could play at the middle school gym, but it's our league it's a city resource, yes.
Okay, but that wouldn't,
that's fair.
Since it's at the middle school gym, that wouldn't count towards the numbers then?
It would, because it's our.
Oh, okay, so it's the city's league or other leagues coming to play on city fields?
Yes.
Okay, oof, all right,
Yes.
This is complicated. And did this go by the Parks and Recs Commission?
It's been through Parks and Rec. Initially, we had the workshop that went through. We've been monitoring it. They got the report for AB 2404.
Okay.
And they added to their work plan, so we had another discussion at that time as well. This policy, no, because this was going to be a policy matter that was going to be implemented as a regulatory issue by the council at your level. Again,
Okay.
the policy is not the law. There's the
Sure.
law, and this policy is helping us be in compliance with the law.
And describe the outreach to ALL and other users
For which part?
for the policy.
When we hosted the training, we sent it to all field users. Each time we're doing an invitation to request field use, this discussion about participation numbers, we talk with them about that as well when they're submitting their information. Now, in that first round of data that we collected, we did a verbal back and forth with our leagues because we didn't have that information on our applications. And so I'm not going to tell you that year one was exact in getting numbers. It's been getting better as we've been formalizing the process of adding that in there.
Okay, I'm totally in favor of the spirit of this. But the one final thing that I wonder if it needs tweaking is the process. That there is no appeals process, or rather the appeals process is to yourself, and what I'm hearing is that that doesn't feel very good for some of the major users. Is there something we could do to make that better, to tweak that?
Definitely. I think that in my role is to collect that complaint and collect information, and then I could just go right to Parks and Rec to have them be the first step in an appeal, or just as the next step in the process, I would collect information and that would be presented to the Parks and Rec Commission. Or I'm open to whatever the following policy is on that.
Under this law, do you have to have designated compliance officers like under Title IX at universities?
You're supposed to, yes.
Is that you?
That's what is designating that. If you have a complaint, there's an actual person that you can complain to, is basically.
But I mean, do you have to sign some state document that says you're the certified designated official?
No. But it's taking the necessary step to put that in place so that we have somebody, because currently we do not have that as a policy.
So does the complaint person have to be a person, or can it be the commission?
It could be the commission.
I mean, that would meet the law.
Yeah. Yes. You just have to have a process in place that someone can file a complaint and they know the process. Sure.
That seems to make a little bit more sense.
I'd like to make some comments. As someone who has a daughter who played soccer, I totally get the spirit of this. I think particularly girls who are exposed to recreational and organized sports gain an enormous amount out of it. And I saw it with my daughter while she was still playing soccer and even beyond. But this idea of the process, I think the issue I have with this is sort of the process, not just what's in the regulation as it stands now, but the way this all kind of evolved. I know that the state has this mandate, and there's certain requirements that you're trying to fill, and that's a given. But even though this wasn't, this isn't a law or an ordinance that would have gone the way planning and zoning takes that on and has the hearings and goes through this whole process before it comes to us, I think Parks and Rec Commission should have, been more involved with this, not just having a presentation to them and getting to ask questions, but I think they could have been involved with the nitty-gritty of actually getting this through to the point that we see it here. They may not have been able to come up with anything much different, but I think in doing so, I think it would have been more opportunity for all the different sports groups to weigh in. It would have been messier for sure. It would have taken longer for sure, but I think we would have come up with a better product, even if the product was almost exactly the same, because it's just process is everything, and I think of all the different groups that have been able to talk through more and more. I think there would have been tweaks to this that I think would have resolved some of the difficulties that we heard about tonight. Ultimately, I agree with you. The root problem is we don't have enough fields. We don't have enough places for kids to play. And I saw this from day one when I got involved with soccer years ago. We just need more space, for kids to go out and do things. My own little plug, we have a park on Pierce Street that has a big flat field out there that we're just seeded over with sod. That could be used for any number of things that could be recreational activities. We're not going to get a full-size baseball field out of it. We're not going to get a full-size soccer field, but we'd get something that some kind of organized sports could probably use from time to time, and it might help a little bit. But that's not on the agenda tonight, so I won't go any further with that. I think the other issue here, though, is also the way these state laws come down, whether it's field usage and gender equality or regional housing needs, they look at it as, well, you're the city and you have to come up with this number of housing, and it has to be so much low income and so much extra low income, et cetera. And, that's not what's going on here. We're a regional place. Albany is its own city, but we're also connected to El Cerrito and Richmond and Berkeley and Emeryville and all these other cities. And unless, something can, look at that and see what's going on, it's really hard to come up with exact equality on this kind of thing. So I think I would feel more comfortable if this went back to the planning, not planning and zoning, but Parks and Rec Commission, and let them hold some hearings and get on with this. I don't know how others feel tonight, although, like I say, I agree that it's the right thing to do, and I totally support it, but I think the process was not so good.
We need a motion. I'm going to move that we remain in session another 15 minutes.
Second.
In agreement?
Sure.
Those of you that are still awake? Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what Pete Moss has said. When I read this, I was just extremely enthusiastic. I mean, it's very exciting. I think that the staff deserves kudos on the change in the ratios that are being reported. It's just tremendous that we're bringing more girls in. But I hear people not liking this. I'm not positive what they're proposing to be different, but I don't so much want to hear that as I want Parks and Rec to hear that, and people who are really knowledgeable and focused on this to understand what are our options. Are there options here that would make this more workable for these active groups and still meet the objective that we're striving for? I can't really tell with some of the comments, and I did read all these materials, but I don't really know when I look at this what are the sideboards and constraints. From the compliance toolkit, it looks like there are choices to be made, but so there might be options that we could take advantage of, but I just can't tell. So I would really like to hear the Parks and Rec Commission's take on this. I'd like to hear their either recommendation or if they would recommend changes to this.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea to have a bit more public hearing. But I caution that it might be only tweaks that can be done here, because I think that I don't want to have staff go down the road of trying to figure out how you roll the numbers, and it's probably not even it doesn't even apply to AB 404, but how you roll the numbers if you include the regional groups' participation and factor that all in. I don't think there's a way for staff to do that. I think the only way that they're going to be able to do the numbers is by participants, leagues, and on our city fields. I mean, that's what the law is. So we're not going to get anywhere that way. I just want to caution everyone about that. But there could be opportunities for a lot of other tweaks and changes here. And it's always more successful to have people feel like they're talked out, that they've had all the discussion that they possibly can have, and they might not like it, but at least I don't feel like maybe all the user groups here feel like they've been heard fully on this. And so they might not like the final product, but I want to make sure that they feel like they're heard fully.
So what is the timeline? I mean, if we go back to Park and Rec, first question I have is this on their work plan?
Yes. Reporting is on, yes.
So we could,
an annual report.
we could sort of mush this into their work plan, and they don't have to come back to us to ask permission to change the work plan.
That would be up to you.
The council can simply direct them without an amendment to the work plan.
Okay, so we can do that. So what is the timeline going forward? You need to know.
It is true, we're coming up on another field user application process. I mean, we're still going to follow the same process that we're using currently, which is an administrative process for accepting field user requests for field use and participation data. I mean, we still need to collect the data. We still have to have the information because tomorrow we could have someone file a lawsuit, basically, is where we are. So we're about, 17 years behind or something.
So what changes would you make if we said, yeah, this policy is perfect tonight, go forth? What would be different in your world tomorrow?
Actually, not much, except for the sample questionnaire that's in there, which is just a really interesting way to get information from the user groups that we aren't asking for right now. In terms of the question was, how do you measure growth, and those type of items. We never have that interaction from field users, so we could hear from them more about what they are doing to promote girls in sports. And we started doing that on a more informal basis, talking with the soccer organization. They made some changes to how they schedule and what they schedule on our fields, and gave some more opportunities to girls. So in our next numbers, you'll see an increase by them. But otherwise, we already sent out a field application. We already asked for numbers. We send it out on the normal time. When we get them in, we have conflicts. We are collecting our information based on the law and trying to make sure that we're providing girls with opportunities that boys have. The example is like Ocean View Field Lights. We can't just give it to one side without making sure that we provide it to someone else. So not a whole lot will change. This really was formalizing some of the items in there in terms of our stance in gender equity, and that it's a valuable thing, and that the city wants to hear if there are complaints.
And I think the one thing that does strike me as just a little convoluted is, and I think pushing it to Park and Rec is good, that when there's a complaint, it doesn't go to the same person who's setting up the program. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. So I think putting that to Park and Rec seems to work out a little better. If nothing's going to change in the way you're doing business, if we implement this, I'm not sure why we would send it back to Park and Rec.
I make a suggestion.
Sure.
On item 6, you could change that to define the Park and Rec Commission's role. In the actual policy, page 3, the complaint procedure, the Recreation and Community Services Director would receive the complaint, provide information and a report to the Park and Rec Commission for review and analysis. I think another thing you could add to this policy is the Park and Rec Commission could review it on an annual basis to hear from the community and see how it's working. And if there are things to tweak, then at least we would have some information in terms of how it's been implemented to see what the issues may be.
It's true, because it does make a lot of requirements on the department in terms of reporting, and reporting that to the Parks and Rec Commission. So right now, there are no requirements for us to go necessarily to report. This really puts it on us to make sure we're collecting data, reporting to Parks and Rec, which gives people an opportunity to discuss it at that time. And then also a timeline for doing youth surveys, and a timeline for doing a self-assessment test on what the department is doing to promote the underrepresented gender.
So I take it we're the first city to try to come up with a methodology, or?
No, there's about 5 cities, and some of them are in Los Angeles, because the initial bill was written based on the city of LA. They had a complaint at that time, and that's where it came from. There's some cities in Los Angeles, but West Sacramento, and some other places have just reinforced their gender equity, that they believe that and they support it, but not a comprehensive, like, here's the things we should be doing.
So when you were coming up with this, did you look at those ordinances?
Yeah, they all contain the same information, because it's based on what the law says you're supposed to be doing. The law has like an A through, G list of the stuff you're supposed to do, so that's what this policy incorporates. That's what the toolkit basically incorporates as well, as that items that you're supposed to be checking off to make sure you're in compliance. It's written, and Dr. Lopano is writing this on a preventive side here's what you should be doing to be in compliance, is based on Title IX experience of hers, because normally she just gets the lawsuit and tries to teach people in reverse how to be in compliance. And so this was a way to be preventive for a department.
But you said that you were relying on the organizations to give you counts. That's not a good way to do it. I mean, it's more burdensome for you, but the city needs to be out there counting. Or you can get some cool high-tech drones with face recognition software, and they can, just like in the movies.
That would be helpful. The application that now is sent out is that, you're signing off that these are your numbers. What we've had to do is, because they're not accurate, when we ask for the information and we ask for them to submit field requests, they haven't even finished registration. And so we've done it twice now. So we'll do an initial one where they give us their best, I guess it's a guess, I don't know. And then we've had to follow up and ask, and we've had things change at the end of the season.
Well, to flip this around for the organizations, I find it odd that we might be sued by an organization which was providing numbers to us, which is the basis for their lawsuit.
Yes, I do
That's
too.
that's a showstopper for me. But I suspect, following up on what Nick said, I think we can kick this back down to Parks and Rec. But I think the process is going to be what's called consensus by exhaustion. That is, we'll just get tired of this and we'll all just, work something out and then just deal with it and live with it. But if we need to, do that, then that's fine. Let's do it.
Well, I think to take it back to my original point, though, is we have time to put it back to Park and Rec. Because you're trying to get people signed up for fields now. And, they meet in December, right? They do that?
Yes. Yes, it's, at any given point, we start implementing because we're supposed to be in compliance, and then there was a complaint that we didn't have a policy. We come up with a policy, and there's a complaint because they don't like the policy. So, we're, in terms of doing what's right for the city and doing what's right for youth and the community, we need to get this in place. And I think it's really important to take a stance on that. But so it's not going to change our process in terms of allocating field use in the spring. We're going to follow our same practice that we followed for the past, since I've been here, 15 years of providing youth organizations with field space.
Well, then we certainly would not want to hold up your information gathering. You're saying that the one thing that would change is the implementation of the survey, and we do want to implement that right away.
Correct. Because currently, we can make up a form. That's what we do. We have an application to rent a field space or a picnic. That's what we do in recreation. This was a more comprehensive one that we'd like to use and make sure that everybody got to see it and know what we were going to be asking and ask for more information. We're still going to be collecting numbers because we're not going to just stop trying to be in compliance. That's even worse to me. So we're still going to be asking for participation numbers by gender.
Well, I think it's, talking about moving goalposts, perhaps there's something to be said for creating a policy, getting it in place. Since we don't really know what the outcomes are going to be, just do it. Do something consistently for a year, and then just evaluate and tweak the policy. But if we keep trying to sort of tweak as we go, it gets pretty mushy, and it doesn't really allow us to comply with state law, I suspect.
That's correct.
So we could also just agree, given Nicole's thoughtful changes, we could just agree to do this tonight and then just say, okay, this is it. We're going to live with it. Let's talk in a year and see how it turned out. That's another option.
I like that option. We have about 2 minutes. So, Michael, was that a motion?
I'll make that a motion, sure.
Is there a second? I'll second it. Any more discussion?
Could we just clarify the motion? It was to pass this with the change for the Park and Rec being the hearing the complaints. Was that?
It would amend item 6 on page 3. So yes, Park and Rec Commission would be the responsible party for receiving and reviewing any complaints.
Okay.
Administering the complaint procedure, basically. But you would also add to this policy that the Park and Rec Commission would be tasked with an annual review of the policy to recommend any changes to the city council.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take those as friendly amendments.
It's very similar to our street tree policy, where Park and Rec Commission administers it, and then there is some interface with the city council.
One question, though, any complaint regarding gender equity in youth sports programs, could we include any complaint regarding gender equity or other issues of fairness in youth sports programs or something along those lines? Because the way this is written, it looks like the only kind of complaint that could be registered would be that we were not complying with gender equity requirements. And from the testimony we heard tonight, the complaint is more likely to be that the field allocation was unfair because of whatever. It isn't fair to the gender that is not underrepresented.
Well, my concern is Craig can respond to this, is our policy has to be responsive to the state law as it's written. Fairness, I'm not sure if the broad concept of fairness was embodied in the state law.
The basic purpose of the policy is to implement the gender equity requirements, so it seems like that would be the appropriate focus for any complaint procedure.
So a complaint policy doesn't really address the issues. It doesn't really give the people who are unhappy about the field allocation, it doesn't really offer them a remedy. It only offers a remedy if you feel that the Parks and Recreation Department has not gone far enough to assure compliance.
Well, that's the way it's designed currently. I mean, if the council was intending to create an appeal process or a complaint process for the allocations on issues that are unrelated to gender equity, I mean, you could certainly do that. It's really it's a bit outside the scope of what this policy is intended to do. But that would be expanding the role of the Parks and Rec Commission to deal with basically all field allocation issues.
Yeah, which would not, that doesn't make sense to me. It would make a lot more sense to me for the Parks and Rec Department or the Parks and Rec Commission rather, to review the policy and make a recommendation to us.
We have a motion on the floor here.
Okay.
And we have a second.
Yeah, I still have a second, yeah.
Let's poll the council, and then we'll see where we are.
Yeah.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
I think I'm going to be the symbolic no on this one for my.
Councilmember Nason?
I'm going to be a no as well.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes. Motion carries. Okay, we do need to have another motion, to extend till 11:30, and then we'll talk fast.
So moved.
And seconded.
Okay, now we're all in agreement?
Yes.
All right, where are we? Okay, other business announcements of events, future agenda items. Any future agenda items? Okay, the next.
I'm sorry, just a reminder, we did have a request from Alan Maris for a future agenda item. I just want to remind folks about that.
We will keep that in mind. The next city council meeting will be on Monday, December 4th. There will be a slightly different schedule after that, with no meeting on December 18th and special meetings on January 8th and 22nd. With that, we are adjourned. I know.